on this shows me what I'm doing for the program feed and what I'm doing before, like what's about to be up. So I like to put up the main room feed, and when I'm ready to hit the transition, I hit auto, I can switch this to so that it goes from preview to program feed. So you hit auto, and it just puts that in. So now, when I'm ready, it'll cut to the skin. And you can preview anything. I mean, you can preview SuperSource, which is a box inside of box. He's okay. He's had some health issues. I think he's okay. Yeah, he'll be back for the next one. He's doing okay. He helped set up today.
We're starting at 7:30. What's that?
He helped set up today. He's in the office. Absolutely. Yeah, he was not feeling well beforehand, but he wanted to get through the presentation.
We have a seat for Steve Fogarty if he should come.
So, there's not really much to know. Once we have it done,
He is. I think he is.
Coming in about
30, yeah.
if anything really is bad,
So
come to camera 3.
Can we put a seat in front?
Auto to queue. Bring the wine shop presentation.
yeah.
What I normally do for presentations is you have this one that's
Sure.
with H transfers. Let me get the color that shows what's on this. Absolutely. And so like when you're ready, you hit auto and it goes to HDMI. So whatever's on this computer is going to show. This computer is the key to most of this. Controls most of these things. That's the big server at the start.
Is there any benefit? Because I know when I had to do it last time,
I can't get into board docs again. I don't know why.
You reset your password. I don't remember what we reset it to.
I do,
You do, but it
but
won't
it's
let you in.
wrong. It won't let me in. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, do you know where Tommy Parker is doing his rehab? Is it in St. Lawrence or somewhere else?
I don't have access to it.
And I just saw his wife. I think he's at home because he got an award
Oh,
from
he got
Hawaii.
back. He got home.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
last time I was doing it, I just tried to put on,
That just is an instant switch, whereas this
yeah.
is a
Oh,
1
so that's a
second
gradual.
fade.
Okay, I was gonna ask you different.
You can make it more gradual, but it's a 1 second sort of. Whereas what you do is it's right on.
Got you.
You can do that.
And then the second question is, when we're scrolling through the agenda, do I need to do anything for that, or do I just let?
It does it automatically because there's two things. I have the agenda up in a page, and I have what's called the scoreboard. The scoreboard just tracks where they are in the system and keeps going. Let me check something on the machine. I'm sure. I thought we even saved it. There it is. Does it work? Will it float? Oh, it's so weird.
I can't vote.
I understand. Well, you can.
I can just raise my hand. I'll do it old school.
That's not fun. Nobody likes doing it old school. Let me click everything else and just see. Let me go back to Safari. Because it does have the passwords. The machine overhead seems like it's running a little bit slow. That's interesting. Let me give it a
Was
quick
it?
restart.
All right.
Was it the
We're
October?
going to try this again.
All right. I'll
So-
stand over here. They can start.
Right.
Oh.
I'm over here.
I guess if we have.
There's 2 meetings ago. September, yeah. So that's why it's on again. No, I'm talking, you definitely talking about that.
All right.
Oh,
Do you
okay.
remember your login to the computer?
Talking about the finance.
That I can reset. You want to take a guess first?
Yeah.
So it'd be your full name. I can look it up to make sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, did
She
you
always
get
had
in?
that issue.
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, you're fine. I have 20.5, 200 minutes.
And your guest doesn't work.
No. This time I'm writing it down.
There you go. Account status. Account is disabled.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. As an update, that's something that's coming up, yeah.
That would explain.
Well, it's possible. If you tried too many times, it might have been disabled.
Yeah.
No, didn't work.
Oh, wait. I found another account with yours. EL. Is it one L?
One out.
Okay, well then this is.
I think we can.
I'm gonna set your password. Yeah, but it's gonna clear all the passwords. that you
Oh.
put in. It's fine. Are you sure?
Yeah, just start over.
Let's try this. I'm just gonna go into 2006.
Seems to be walking, okay.
Just start without.
Okay.
Welcome to this public meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. Our mission is to prepare all of our students to lead lives of joy and purpose as knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate citizens of a global society. The board is an elected, unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We are always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and the school district operate under applicable New Jersey law and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes an opportunity for those attending to comment on items on the published agenda or other matters of interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit the time allotted to public participation. Law limits discussion of individual personnel and confidential matters. We desire that our meetings provide useful opportunities for communication between the board and the community. Thank you for attending. I will ask our secretary to read the legal notice.
Sure. As required under the Open Public Meeting Act, NJSA 1046 et sequentia, adequate notice was given for calling this meeting. It was authorized by the Board of Education and forwarded to the municipal clerk, Princeton Packet, and the Times on January 10th, 2019, and distributed to the schools and others on the standard distribution list. The board reserves the right to enter into executive session during all meetings of the Board of Education. Board Policy 2230, recording devices, requires that we inform those attending this meeting that the proceedings are being recorded on video. This meeting is being video recorded and may also be live streamed. The representative of the sending district is authorized to vote on such matters that affect sending district students or affect the governance of the Princeton Public Schools as more specifically designated in NJSA 18A 38.8.1. In the event that this statute is amended, the law shall take precedence over this bylaw. The sending district votes pertaining to personnel action refer to high school, central administrative, and district-wide staff only. Votes otherwise are considered abstentions.
Would you like to call the roll?
Absolutely. Beth Barrand,
Here.
Greg Stankiewicz,
Here.
Betsy Kalber-Baglio,
Here.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Here.
Daniel Dart,
Here.
Jessica Deutsch,
Here.
Bill Hare,
Here.
Brian McDonald,
Present.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder,
Present.
Evelyn Spahn.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item of business is the adoption of minutes from October 15th, 2019. Do I have a motion? Yes, Brian, second? Betsy, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of passing the minutes, show of hands, please.
Okay.
Unanimous?
It's unanimous.
Motion passed. Second item is the amendment of the September 24th, 2019 minutes to reflect committee reports as received in writing from committee chairs. Can I have a motion? Greg? Second? Dan? Any discussion? I'll just say that this reflects the meeting on the 24th. We ran quite late, and we decided to dispense with committee reports and had them attached to the minutes.
That is correct.
Okay, I think then All those in favor? Show of hands.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item is a consent item. It's the harassment, intimidation, and bullying report. We'll cover that under consent. And then, my turn. Okay. So welcome to the October 28th, 2019 regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Princeton Public Schools. We appreciate your joining us tonight as we recognize the service of an outgoing senior member. We hear about standardized testing. We attend to regular board business. We welcome a new member, and we review our communication guidelines. After that, we will adjourn into a second closed session to meet with our negotiations counsel, Stephen Fogarty of the firm Fogarty and Hara, to discuss ongoing preparations for bargaining with our three associations, PRIA, PAA, and PRESA, with respect to contracts that expire in June of 2020. Our negotiations committee consists of Michelle Tuck-Ponder, Chair, Betsy Calber-Baglio, Brian McDonald, myself, Superintendent Cochran, Business Administrator Matthew Bolden, and Director of Human Resources Mike Volpe. We also look forward to participating together with our union leadership in an upcoming training for the New Jersey Labor Management Collaborative, which is a work. Greg can kind of explain this. I think Greg brought this to us, but it's a way that we can work together with our union leadership to focus on matters that really relate to the students that are around student wellness and achievement and equity. And we will be attending 2 trainings in November, full-day trainings at Rutgers. Greg, did you want to say anything about that? Just explain it a little bit.
Sure. This is an initiative done by 2 professors. And there's at least 24 districts right now in New Jersey that are part of this collaborative. Their research shows that districts in New Jersey and elsewhere that have a more collaborative approach to governance, you see higher student achievement data, test scores, and other sorts of data, but you also see higher teacher retention and a number of other ways. And so the evidence is very compelling, their evidence. And I think I feel very honored that we're going to be part of this, and we're going to be one of the newest districts to be enrolled in this, and so this is our initial training.
Yeah.
And it's joint training with our associations, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
Thank you, Greg. This past month, the board has continued oversight of referendum projects and improved facilities maintenance, reviewed testing data in student achievement, gathered data for our planning consultants, heard from parents and staff at committee meetings, bagels with the board, and PTO events, and also continued to build and deepen relationships with community partners, meeting with Kristen Applegate and Brent Colburn of Princeton University to discuss shared interests and ways to collaborate, and with the Princeton Clergy Association to update them on our goals, initiatives, and challenges, and to discuss our shared interest in supporting our students. We welcome invitations to meet with community organizations and will participate in an Engage Princeton meet and greet at the Public Library on Saturday, November 9th from 1 to 2 p.m. I'd like to take a breath here and bring our focus back to the reason we are engaged in all of this work, and that is for the benefit of our students. We meet, we listen, we collaborate, we agree, we respectfully disagree, and we meet some more, all for the 3,800 children in our care. And on the subject of supporting and celebrating our students, Betsy, did you want to mention the encouragement that we go to events?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
I'd love to do that. We had spoken at the beginning of the board year of encouraging board members. Many of us have students in the schools, have our own children in the schools. Some of us don't, but encouraging us and maybe challenging us to attend 2 events that our children are not involved in. I think it's really important for our community, our students, our staff, to see us at these events, supporting those students who we care about very deeply, which is why we do this work. And I was reminded of that when we received the arts newsletter, and there's so many things. Of course, this is the busy season, the busy fun season, but I just remind my colleagues, and I invite the public to please come to these wonderful events, musical, theatrical, athletic, and more. So thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. And next, Jess, would you like to observe our gratitude practice?
So this is the gratitude practice for this evening, which just to remind everyone, we started this sort of formally-ish last month, sorry. And we do this because it sets a tone that we think is healthy and productive and consistent with our mission and values as a district and as a community. At the next meeting, I pledge to have an email address that we can use to accept nominations for inclusion in this report from the board, from the school, and general community. This week, we express gratitude to the YMCA for its many impactful partnerships with our schools. And we do this on the occasion of the Centennial Awards, which were given out last week in honoring the values that we share with the Y, really, caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility. So on behalf of the board this evening, I'm expressing gratitude for Kate Beck and the entire staff of the Y, such important partners. For students who at the Centennial Awards, some of our own students from the district represented us so beautifully, and the award winners who included Tommy Parker, Wayne Mizell, and Ann Klein, friends of our schools. And to close the report, I thought I would just read a little reference that I had found in an article this week about Elijah Cummings, and referencing the ways that we as citizens can honor his legacy. And it's really by asking ourselves, so we can do this as a board and as individuals, a couple of questions. Are you intentionally making efforts to uplift those with whom you work? Do you volunteer for programs and projects that serve a greater purpose? Do you stop and listen to those around you? Do you show your friends, family, and community members that you care about their needs? Do you write, call, or let people know that they've positively impacted your life? So hopefully that's a part of what this gratitude report does, and something we can continue to reflect on.
Thank you, Jess.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Finally, we observe a bittersweet milestone tonight as we thank Evelyn Spahn for nearly a decade of dedicated service to the Princeton Public Schools. Evelyn. Evelyn doesn't want us to do this, but we're going to speak to you anyway. Evelyn has been a constant, clear voice, reminding us of our mission, advocating for data-based decision-making and good process, our institutional memory, ever so polite in disagreement, a generous mentor, encouraging us all to be the best we can be. We will miss her presence at our table and wish her well as she moves on to new adventures. I'm going to read a little proclamation. Whereas Evelyn Spahn has served for almost 10 years as sending district representative to the Princeton Public Schools Board of Education, whereas she has graciously and wisely served under 2 superintendents through multiple contract negotiations and spanning the service of many school board colleagues, whereas she has offered advice on governance and good boardsmanship, welcoming and mentoring new members, whereas she has upheld the public's trust for valuing our human, educational, financial, and capital resources, whereas she helped the board to focus on a clear shared vision of an excellent public education for all students through the effective and efficient operation of the district, whereas she has served on multiple committees with dedication and thoughtfulness, whereas she has been the voice of inclusion and respect for our district's mission, and be it therefore resolved by the Princeton Public Schools Board of Education that we proclaim our gratitude to Evelyn Spahn for her leadership, service, time, and energy during her years of gracious service and many contributions to our community and school district as a member of our Board of Education, and hereby accept her resignation effective at the end of this board meeting. I had reached out to some of the people that have worked with Evelyn in the past, and I believe that Judy Wilson had sent something she would like us to read.
And I am pleased to read Judy Wilson's statement that she wrote in honor of Evelyn. And she wrote, "With the wisdom and insights of a sage, the energy of a teen, the heart of the most loving parent, and the devotion of a true public servant, Evelyn has influenced and shaped the decisions that have impacted the PPS for the last decade. Her dedication has benefited all students, families, and residents in both Cranberry and Princeton. It was my privilege to work with and learn from Evelyn. I join the greater Princeton community in expressing gratitude for who Evelyn is and for all that she has done."
Is there anyone else who would want to say anything at this moment? I know there's some other people here who came for this.
I just wanted to see Evelyn straight on.
You want to say one thing? One other thing? Yes, Molly?
So,
Yeah.
I think we started our board service at the same time, but I've had a break for years.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you so much for your valued service and contribution. You've been such a highly valued asset to this board and this community, and I know how much work goes into serving on a board, especially this board. Thank you all for your service, but thank you. You are highly valued and appreciated by this town and this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Okay, we're going to move on. You're welcome. Evelyn is going to remain at the table until later in the meeting when we will swear in our new Cranberry representative, Peter Katz. Peter is here in the audience, and we will welcome him at his portion of the program. Peter, you can stand up and wave. We know you're here. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Steve now.
Great. I want to welcome everyone to our meeting and take this opportunity to join Beth in thanking the board for all their work this past month on behalf of our students and in partnership with our community. And I also want to take this opportunity to talk about Evelyn. So Evelyn, you are the only one currently on the board who was here 6 years ago at this table when I was hired. And from the very start, I was so appreciative of your kindness. You went out of your way to make me feel welcome in Princeton, and you have never stopped caring about how I was doing and about the balance that all of us need in our professional and personal lives. And so I want to begin just by thanking you for your kindness. But it doesn't stop there, because I want to thank you as well for your multiple areas of expertise. You brought a lot to the table in our numerous conversations as a board. For those of you who may not know, Evelyn has a degree in chemistry. She is super smart. She is analytical on all fronts, and she brought that degree of analysis to every aspect of her work as a board member. Evelyn, you're also a teacher at heart. I know that you have extensive experience as a substitute in many of the districts around Princeton. You understand the art and the science of high-quality teaching, and that understanding has informed every decision you made about what was going on in this district and at PHS. Evelyn is also an accomplished college athlete and a volunteer field hockey coach. And once again, that insight came to bear, and she appreciated the importance of athletics in the lives of our students and the importance of high quality and caring coaches, and she brought that to the decisions that we made here as a board. And Evelyn's highly attuned to the arts. Her daughter, who is now a student at Princeton University, was an accomplished singer and performer at Princeton High School. Evelyn recognized the value of artistic expression for all students, and she has been an outstanding advocate for a school system that fosters equity in the arts, and I thank you for that. But most importantly of all, Evelyn was highly attuned to young people. You were attuned to the pressures that they experience, the academic and social pressures, and you have been unabashedly supportive of our mission to prepare all students to lead lives of joy and purpose. I find it significantly emblematic that Evelyn's seat on the board has literally been the one closest to our students. Evelyn, you've spent a decade caring deeply about the well-being of our kids, and that care will always be your legacy with us. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And on behalf of the board and the administration,
10 years, 10 years.
Say anything?
I don't know.
Did she-
Did you want to say anything, Evelyn, or you want to just?
Look, I don't know that I could follow that. I appreciate the time that you have taken to be here. I thought I would just be saying this to maybe Mr. Montgomery and maybe Gabe. I thought that would be my audience. I really don't have anything that could summarize my work with Princeton, other than to say that it just seemed so normal and so natural and just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Working with Judy Wilson and being downstairs in the basement or in the library at JW, that's where we used to meet. And then coming over here, and I remember very vividly the day that we interviewed Steve. And I know why we interviewed Steve, and I know what our commitment was. And we said, Steve, our children are not happy. And that's what Steve understood the board to say. Our children are not happy, and it really stuck with him. And he was the one candidate that really bothered. And he really came back to us, and we talked about that. And we knew that he was the right person to help us move forward with health and wellness. Health and wellness is why I took a 4th term. It is what I committed my board work to. And I am so happy to see this district lead in health and wellness, and other districts looking at our district and move forward with health and wellness. This board is doing some very positive, groundbreaking stuff, and it's just heartwarming to me to have been just a small part of it. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, both behind the table and in the seats. You all have work tomorrow and you all have things to do, but I do appreciate the voice that comes from the podium. I listen to that. I watch it again, usually the next day, and think about it, and we discuss it more. So your voice is heard, and it just makes us better. So thank you for being here and being part of that, and coming to SAC meetings and doing all the things that you do. It takes all of us, but it really takes our teachers who are masters at their craft, because that connection between the teacher and the child, no one can duplicate that. So we know that that is at the root of everything that we do, and that's what makes Princeton, Princeton. So thank you for the opportunity to serve on this board and to be just a small part of all the many plates that you have spinning. So thank you for taking the time, and I do appreciate all that you do.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Annie Kosick and her team of supervisors to walk us through the standardized test results for our district. But first, I wanted to provide just a little bit of context. Student achievement is measured in multiple ways. The presentation you're about to hear examines student achievement through the lens of state-prescribed standardized tests. And it's important to remember that a standardized test is a snapshot. It gives us information on how a student has done on one test on one day. Nevertheless, the standardized tests are, when viewed across a grade level or by demographic subgroup and over the course of multiple years, patterns begin to emerge. And as you'll hear tonight, these patterns of performance provide us with insights into what we are doing well and to what aspects of our programs and instruction might be improved. For a district like ours, committed to equity and to closing the achievement gap, the patterns of performance revealed by our standardized test data are incredibly important. I want to thank Annie, Ridgela, Stephanie Tidwell, Stephanie Greenberg, Keisha, for being here tonight. and more importantly, for already working with our teachers to dig deeply into that data and to objectively look at it for ways to improve. While standardized tests can be a valuable measure of student achievement, they are still only one way we get to know our kids. To truly appreciate the academic, artistic, and moral achievement of our children, we must look at their grades, their projects, their performances, their personalities, their acts of courage and of character. And so just one quick story before I turn things over to Annie. This past week, our 8th graders made their annual visit to Washington, D.C. They were there for 3 days, and they happened to be at the Vietnam Memorial. At the same time, a group of veterans flown in by the organization Honor Flight were also there. And our 8th graders observed the veterans gathered at the memorial, and then, on their own, unprompted by adults, our students walked up to the veterans, shook their hands, and thanked them for their service. And one gentleman, a Vietnam veteran from Wisconsin, then approached Principal Burr, who was there chaperoning at the time, and with tears in his eyes told him it was the first time he had been thanked for his service. And he went on to say that the experience gave him great hope for our country and great hope for our young people. There are indeed many ways to measure the achievement and potential of our students. So I leave you with that story, and I invite Annie and her team to walk us through the standardized test data.
While Gabe is getting us set up, you did receive an 80-slide PowerPoint in your board packet, and you'll be happy to know that it's reduced to 74. But we will give just the highlights of those 74 slides, so no worries. You ready? Okay. So our presentation tonight is to report the results of the 2018-2019 standardized assessments, which include NJSLA data, SAT, ACT, and AP data. And as Steve has already pointed out, these are just a few of the data points that we use to measure the performance and the growth of our students. Steve also introduced our 4 supervisors who are here tonight, and they will also share their key findings, their areas of focus, how the data will help them inform curriculum reviews, instructional strategies, and professional development that we might need. But first, before we get to them, I'd like to walk you through some of the data. So we use many forms of assessment to provide us with some valuable information. It tells us what we're doing well. It tells us where we might have gaps. It gives us information about our programming and about our classroom instruction. We regularly review assessment data, but we use all kinds of data: formative, summative, benchmark, standardized. All of it helps and leads us to action that brings us to more successful practices in terms of improving student outcomes. So it's a continuous cycle of improvement. Again, state testing is just one data point in a student's academic profile. We also look at daily assessments. And so what you see on this slide here are some of the formative assessments that we use, or diagnostic assessments that we use in language arts and in math with our ELL children, English language learners, and our special ed population. So these are just a few of the things teachers have at their fingertips to help assess student progress. We're provided with data on our students' performance on standardized testing, as you know. And this report provides some of the ways that we look at that data, how we analyze it, and how we use it. There have been some changes to NJSLA testing, and Rigel is going to review with you some of those changes.
I think I've spent the last 2 years talking about the changes that keep coming from the state. So once again, how do I go? Just like, okay. So in 2015, New Jersey adopted the PARC, or Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, to replace the NJASC and the HESPA assessments for grades 3 through 11. And then last year, 2019, PARC became NJSLA, which is New Jersey Assessment of Student Learning. And these assessments are also for ELA and math in grades 3 through 11. Grade 11 became optional last year, spring of 2019, and only our students who needed it as a pathway towards graduation took the ELA assessment for grade 11. This slide highlights the changes from PARC to the NJSLA. So not only did the name change, there was also a change in the length and the time. So the number of units for both ELA and math was reduced by 1, and the time was reduced anywhere from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. So that was a huge change, especially the time. It got us at least a day of testing back, if not 2 in many cases. So I think all of us, the entire community, we were very happy about getting that time back. The performance levels, proficiency scores required to pass, that did not change. They are still the same as they were for PARC. So proficiency level of 4 and 5, which is meeting or exceeding grade level expectations, is still the passing score. And underneath over there are the ranges. For 4 and 5, you can see the range goes from 750 to varied and varied to 850. That varied is because for different grade levels, that point of change is different. The last 2 years, we've seen growth in the participation rates for both ELA and math. As you can see over here, for language arts in spring 2019, the participation percentages range from 93 to 97%. 11th grade is an anomaly over there. And like I said earlier, 11th grade was optional, and only students who needed it as one of the pathways towards fulfilling the graduation requirements took the ELA 11. And they just had to sit for the test. They did not need to pass it to fulfill that requirement. For math also, the participation rates range from 83 to 100%. Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, the rates you see over there are for both JW and PHS students, because these 3 math courses, they are taken by our middle school students also. I'm going to turn it over to Annie. The next slide.
So as we dive in, we begin by looking at data across our schools and how we compare it to state results. The important work is in disaggregating the data to understand every subgroup's performance level. So we look at individual standards, we look at it at an item level, and then most importantly, we look at it at an individual student level. So let's first look at English language arts. So these are the graphs that you saw many of in your packet. These graphs show the proficient scores of 4, and the green and the blue show the proficiency scores of 4 or 5. So those are students who pass the assessment. A score of 3, which is the gold, means that they were approaching the standard. This chart, this next one, just gives you that same information, but in chart form. So if you look at the bold numbers, those are our students compared to the state, and the unbolded ones. But since there's a lot of numbers on this, I'd like to bring you to this slide here, because this one is a little bit more meaningful. It's an important way for us to look at the data. So if you look at the two columns that are highlighted, the green and the gold, if you look at grade 8, let's use that as an example. If you look across to level 4 and 5, which is the last green column, 81% of the students passed with scores of a 4 or 5. So 81% of our 8th graders passed. But that means that 19% did not pass. That would be the numbers you see in the first 3 columns. But if you look at the gold column, for 8th grade, you see that 14.3% of the students scored at a level 3, which means they were approaching the standard. So why is that important? It's important to us because that's one of the ways that we will determine the appropriate instructional interventions for students. So students who are at a 3 means they're on the cusp. They're just a few points away from passing the test. So there might be tier 1 or tier 2 interventions that we would put in place for those students. If you look at the remainder of the students who received a 1 or a 2, so it's a little 4.5%, about 4.5%, we know we need more intensive intervention for those students. So this is an important chart to look at for that. So looking student by student, group by group, is something that the supervisors will do at the department meetings and with teachers to really look closely at this data. Okay. This is a 3-year analysis. So there are 2 things to remember about this. This is by grade over 3 years, but 2 things to remember, that each year it's a different cohort of kids, and then it is 2 years of PARCC and 1 year of NJSLA. So we're comparing different tests and different groups of kids. So that's just something important to note. What we did was to do this 3-year analysis for every subgroup. This is just an example of this subgroup breakdown for special education students. And in your packets, you will see that we have one of these charts for all of our subgroup populations. I want slide. All right, this is the slide I'm looking for. Okay, this slide, this line graph, gives you a really clear visual of each of the subgroups over a 5-year span. So again, it's 4 years of PARCC, it's 1 year of NJSLA, and this is English Language Arts. So we got district averages. They were derived from the average passing percentages in grades 3 through 10 for each subgroup. For ELLs, and that one line you see, that's just an upward line in between 2018 and 2019. Those are ELL students. I don't know if you can read down at the bottom the key. Those are our ELL students, and we have only 2 years of data for them. So that's why you just see that one line there. If you look up at the black line, which looks like it's the 4th one from the top, that is all students. The other top lines up there, they're above the black line, are white students, Asian students, and multi-race. So the blue is, I believe blue is white, the gray is Asian, and the green is our multi-race students. So visually, you can see a gap between the subgroups at the top of this graph and the subgroups toward the bottom. So the bar graphs that the teachers look at give them the same information, but it gives it to them by grade level and over a 3-year span, so that they can really drill down and look at what's happening here. The brown line, the very bottom line, is our economically disadvantaged students. So they are accounted for in the other groups as well, but we wanted to put that in there to show you. Now, one of the things from 2015 to 2019, we are on somewhat of an upward trajectory, but the gap isn't closing between, you know, the groups that are the 4 lines at the bottom and the 4 at the top. All right, I'm going to just move on to math and just give you a brief overview of the math as well. So again, this is our bar chart, a bar graph of our proficiency of the total students in math. The reason that the 8th grade is blocked out there is because of the number of students. Most of our students in math in 7th and 8th grade take, very few of our students take grade 7 or grade 8 math. They take Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or geometry. So their numbers are in the columns to the right. And so that number is too small and easily identifiable, so we do not include that in public data. So this, again, is the same as what you saw in the previous graph, but it's in a chart form. So that these numbers, and again, we are the bold numbers here. All right, I'm going to skip. Okay. Again, we have the 3-year analysis for our math students. These are by grade level, again. Again, recognizing that it is 3 different cohorts of kids and 2 different tests, PARCC and NJSLA. We again have a series of slides that show you by subgroup the same information. And I'm going to switch down to our math slide, line graph, which will give you an overview of the subgroup average passing rates for each subgroup. So again, 4 years of PARCC data, 1 year of NJSLA. These are district averages derived from average passing percentages in grades through 10 for each subgroup. The black line for all students, and as you can see, that black line has stayed fairly stable over time. And the other top lines, the blue is white students, the green is multi-race, and the gray, Asian. Again, the gap we can clearly see here. There are a couple of places where we see a decrease between 2018 and 2019. So for example, if you look at the royal blue line, the white students subgroup, and if you look at the brown line, which is our economically disadvantaged students, just between 2018 and 2019, we see a decline. This may be partially due to the change in the test, but an item analysis tells us more. And that's something that Stephanie is working on with her department, to look at that level of analysis with the teachers to determine exactly what the reason is for that. And again, the bar graphs help teachers zero in more specifically to their grade level. Okay. Moving on to science. We have nothing to report. We have not received our data. The state has not released any data yet, so that will be coming. I want to quickly go through our AP data, SAT and ACT participation and performance rates. Okay. These charts are easily understandable, and we can go through them quickly. This shows that this year, or this past year, 93% of our students received a 3 or better on their AP exams. So you can see that that's even an improvement over the last 5 years. This chart just shows you that 611 students took an AP exam, and those 611 students took 1,480 exams. And 568 of those 611, which was 93%, received a 3 or better on at least one exam that they took. Now, this is very interesting data. This chart shows disaggregated AP results by subgroups. I'll use one as an example to explain how to read this chart. So if you look at our Hispanic subgroup, 37 Hispanic students took an AP exam. So that was 6% of the 611. If you look down in the bottom part of the chart, there are 126 Hispanic students among the 1,593 students at the high school. That was last year's enrollment numbers, which is about 7.9% of the total enrollment. So while Hispanic students make up 7.9% of the total school population, they were 6% of the AP exam takers. So again, this would be an area of focus for us. So we can do this comparison across any of the subgroups. And if you look at the bottom percentage, so for example, if we take our white population, just for an example, they make up, the white subgroup makes up 54.8% of the total enrollment at the high school, and they were 47.1% of the 611. Whereas our Asian population make up 23.9% of the total school enrollment and 33% of the 611 who took the test. So again, this is information for us that is, has meaning to the way we develop curriculum, programming, instructional strategies in our classrooms. The next section is on SAT and ACT, and I'm going to go through these very quickly as well. You have the full charts in your packet. So our SAT participation and performance rates, if you look at what's outlined in red, so we had 316 students who took the SAT with an average score of 1293. The state average was 1059. Someone had asked about what the benchmarks meant. And so where you see those two columns, or actually there are 4 columns of met benchmarks, either they met both, they met the English reading writing, they met math, or they met neither. Those are the way of identifying students who are thriving and require greater challenge, and identifying those requiring additional academic support. And those students they look at, are they 1 year behind growth toward the benchmark, or more than 1 year? So this is another way to look at our SAT scores. 69% of our students earned a 1200 or better, compared to the state's 26%. For English reading writing, 72% earned a 600 or better, compared to the state's 29%. And in math, 70% earned 600 or better, compared to the state's 27%. So we're doing well there. This is a look at our subgroup population and our test takers. And again, we had 316 students, total students, take an SAT, the SAT. And one of the things we can glean from this data is that 78 Asian students took the test, and 95% of them earned a 1200 or better. 22 African American students took it, and 23% earned a 1200 or better. Of the 25 Hispanic students, 40% earned a 1200 or better. Of the 162 white students, 69% earned a 1200 or better. and of our multi-race students, 53% earned a 1200 or better. The next slide is just one quick slide. This is the information we get from the ACT. So our composite score, average composite score was 29. The state's average composite score is 20.8. So we're significantly higher. It looks on this graph like there's a gap between our science and math and our English and reading, but if you look, it's really just a 1-point difference because they grade with a decimal along the bottom. Okay. All right. I am going to turn this over now to our supervisors because they are here to tell you what it is you really want to know, which are what are our true highlights, what are our areas for target, and what are their next steps for their departments and teachers. So Keisha, and Keisha is our supervisor of K-8 Language Arts.
Thank you. Good evening. So one of the things that I want to say before we look at the specific highlights is just to give you a little bit more information about how we've used the data so far this year. So we start out our year looking at individual student data. If you recall, several slides ago now, Annie showed a pyramid that spoke to how data are used and at what level you're able to provide individual student assistance. So we do start out looking at the data for individual students in order to determine which students may or may not need intervention. And then as we're looking closer and closer into the data, we get to what are called evidence statement analyses, which are documents that show you standard by standard how our students performed, not at an individual level, but we have school and district level data. And so looking at those data, we're able to see some highlights. So when we looked from grades 3 through 8, we're able to see at each grade level where we may have had some growth looking across the standards. And so there are different types of writing categories. For the assessment in total, there are 3 different tasks that the students have to respond to. They respond to 2, but there are 3 different types that they might get. And when we look across those categories, as well as their knowledge of language and conventions and written expression, in 3rd grade, we were able to see that there was growth between where the schools had performed last year and where they performed, or I should say in 18, and where they performed last year. And so when we looked especially for the prose constructed responses, which are a narrative task, a literary analysis task, and a research simulation task, we were able to see growth in 3rd grade in all of those areas. When we looked at 4th grade in particular, we were able to see growth in the research simulation task. And just to give an idea, these are extremely rigorous tasks that students have to do where they're looking across multiple texts and they're able to show their understanding looking at different texts and being able to synthesize across. In 5th grade, for the literary analysis task, we were able to see that students were able to grow from the prior year. Now, when we look in the middle school, the picture looks a little bit different. In grade 6, the school was actually above in the majority of the standards that were assessed. And then I'm going to skip down to grade 8 before speaking to grade 7. In grade 8, the only areas where there were any questions about whether or not growth were needed were areas where only 2 students had actually received a task that was aligned to that standard. So of course, for 2 students, we're not going to be concerned. It's something for us to note, but not anything that's a concern. What's really a huge highlight on this slide in particular, though, is 7th grade. You may have noticed when Annie was speaking to the data at grade level earlier, 7th grade, 92.5% of our students were meeting or exceeding grade level standards. And so you can see from the quick narrative here, we were of course, stronger than the state in all of those areas, but in particular, our growth was extremely high in each of the areas for the writing assessments that the students were given for that grade level. So 7th grade was definitely one that we're going to be looking at more closely to see if there are things that we can learn. When we think about some different targets that we can have from those data highlights that were just discussed, of course, we want to begin to dig deeper into areas where there may have been gaps amongst the schools and try to determine where are some strong trends and where are some areas where we can possibly learn from where those strong trends are in order to strengthen some other classrooms across the district. We also want to look at our students' abilities to compare and contrast informational text. We know that in all grades that are at an elementary level, students are typically stronger in fiction. And so when it comes to comparing and contrasting informational text, that's an area where we're going to be continuing to do some work to do interdisciplinary connections in order to have that growth that's needed. In third grade in particular, one of the tasks that becomes really hard for students to do is to understand the central message in a literary text, and that requires a lot of inferring across a passage. And so that's an area where we're going to need to focus. In fourth grade, looking at how well students can understand how the different parts of a text actually contribute to the meaning of the entire text, and then also being able to summarize across a text. Those are really high standards or high expectations for students. In fifth grade, being able to read multiple accounts of an event and to analyze across those. And again, that's that intertextuality we talked about earlier that is a high-level skill for our students. In seventh and eighth grade, as was discussed for the previous slide, there were no areas for us to really dig into from those data. Of course, from other data that we have at a district level, there are areas for us to look into, but not from the state assessment. However, in sixth grade, we can look and try to do some more work to make sure that our students are able to analyze theme and central idea, whether it be a literary text or a nonfiction text, of course, with central idea, our students' abilities to summarize, and then to be able to distinguish between their own personal opinions or judgments and what the text is actually saying from the author. And then, of course, another interdisciplinary implication is for students to be able to describe how a text presents information. So being able to look at a deep level at the craft that the author has used and determine, how the author has used that in order to communicate his or her message. So when we look at next steps for this year, I guess before I even get to the slides, one of the things I can say is we went into the year this summer with the institutes actually doing some work to help teachers create toolkits. And so the toolkit will help teachers to be able to do the work of addressing individual students' needs. But then when we look across the rest of the year, of course, tomorrow night, we will be beginning our K-12 English Language Arts program review, and that's going to speak a lot to the future of our programming. And so we're excited about the team that's being impaneled in order to do that work. In grades K through 5, we're looking to have some targeted professional development, looking at how to use level literacy intervention in order to address the needs of students. Last year, thanks to the board, we were able to provide that for grades K through 2. This year, we'll be doing that for grades 3 through 8. Also, we are going to be having a contingent of staff from the district go to an institute that specifically looks at how to develop toolkits in order to support students who have IEPs, so that we're really looking at how to make sure that the different curriculum we have in the district for English language arts are being used to home in on the areas that specific students need to grow aligned to their individual education programs. Then, of course, we want to address horizontal and vertical articulation. So we've begun already to hold some grade level meetings, really focusing in on the DRA benchmark data and looking at ways that we can make sure that we're all calibrated so that we can use the results of that tool in order to make some meaningful decisions for our students. We look to expand grade level meeting use for English language arts focuses throughout the year. Also having, of course, the literacy cohorts, which have already begun for this year. And then last year we tried to start the rollout of hashtag PPS ELA Gems. We are growing in our ability to use Twitter, and so we have varying levels of success with that, but that is something that we're excited about. In addition, we will have our first department newsletter that will come out in a few weeks, and so our content team leaders for language arts are working on that, and we're very excited about the data connection that we have for our first issue in order to help teachers just understand a little bit better how to do the next steps once we have all this data that was being entered into our school platform over the past few weeks. In grades 3 through 8, we'll continue to disaggregate the data. As you saw in the slides Annie presented, we see that there is definitely a gap based on socioeconomic status, and we want to delve deeper into that. We also see, depending on the different areas, as I spoke to earlier, we have different pieces of data from the assessment that we can use at a school level. One of them tells us for each of the subclaims what we may have as strengths in one school that might also be areas for us to grow and for us to learn from each other, because that's the really important part when you're functioning above the state, is to see where your internal pockets of wisdom and excellence so you can grow from those. So we want to mine those gaps in order to grow internally. And then in grades 6 through 8, thank you again to the board. Friday will be our first staff development day with TC, the Reading and Writing Project, and we're very excited about beginning that work. So that is the K-8 picture, and now for high school.
Good evening. When we are looking at, we'll go old school. When we are looking at the ELA level, at the high school level ELA results, we have a slightly narrower band, of course, than for K-8. And we choose to focus on the NJSLA results and also the AP results, since those are our school-based testing quadrants. In terms of highlights, we were excited to see results in grades 9 and 10 that significantly exceeded the statewide pass rates. 84% pass rate for grade 9 compared to 55.3% statewide. And in grade 10, 79.4% pass rate compared to 58% statewide. I also wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the AP data that was referenced before. Since the 11th grade NJSLA test is, there were 23 students, I believe, who took it, and that was a very specific group of students who had mostly test refused the previous year and needed to sit but not necessarily pass the exam in order to access high school graduation routes. We chose to go to the AP English results, which were really an astonishing success. We had a 100% pass rate on the AP English exam for 11th graders. We had, and this isn't up here, but we had 92 students enrolled in AP English, and 86 of them took the exam. 100% passed, with 56% earning the highest score of 5. So I want to take a minute just to congratulate the students who made that achievement, and of course the AP English 3 teachers who were able to lead students to that degree of success. In terms of areas to target, we were pleased to see that juniors enrolled in AP English do represent all racial groups. However, that representation is not proportional, as the earlier slides indicated. Certain racial groups are statistically overrepresented in our population, and other racial groups are underrepresented. And that really is sort of a school-wide charge in terms of examining our practices of student placement, making sure that we don't have barriers constructed for students to enroll in a class and succeed in it. And then, of course, an area to target is that our 9th and 10th grade NJSLA pass rates in disaggregated groups are showing an achievement gap, as we discussed earlier. In terms of action plan for 9 through 12 English Language Arts Next Steps, So, as Keisha mentioned, we are excited to be engaging in a program review beginning literally tomorrow with a team of teachers who span the K-12 gamut. They are eager to delve into our data and our results and our practices. We want to make sure that we are examining and fortifying our successes, for instance, the 9th through 11th and K through 11th practices that are leading to such high success rates on the AP English exam. We definitely need to assess the efficacy of support structures that are in place, including plus classes at the high school and similar structures that exist in K-8. And we need to consider implementing new approaches and new curricula that would support our students who are not achieving at the rates that we would like them to. More broadly, we are piloting new texts and curricular approaches in a move towards embracing culturally responsive pedagogy, and that's also part of our program review set of elements that we're looking at. And one thing that we've already begun is using the SGOs, the student growth objectives, as a way to implement vertically and horizontally aligned skill-based team expectations to make sure that across 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, that teachers are similarly scaffolding their skills and their expectations for reading, for writing, on all the skills that show up on NJSLA, on ELA, and for college success as well. Okay.
And we're going to move on to mathematics. Stephanie Tidwell is our K-12 math supervisor, new this year with us. And welcome, Stephanie.
Good evening. I'm actually going to focus on looking at the 3-year analysis of our student population so that we can sort of get an idea of what the trends are in our data as it relates to mathematics. First, some highlights that I'd want to point out is that looking at the 3-year analysis, we can basically say that for grades 3 through 5, we have a passing rate that averages somewhere around a 70% range if you look across the years, with our students meeting or exceeding expectations. That would mean being at a level 4 or 5. At the same token, when we look at our math beyond grade 6, we see that a larger portion of our population is moving towards the higher level maths. You cannot probably see the number below in terms of the number of students that are actually taking in grade 7, the number of students that took the test. However, our number from grade 6, if you look at just 18-19, we had 238 students taking the grade 6 test, where we had 36 students taking the grade 7 math test, which means we have more students moving into taking the test in higher level maths. Additionally, we also see a 40% increase in the number of students taking Algebra 2 from 2018, in 2018, and a 20% increase in 2019. The majority, respectively, also, we have a 12% increase and a 9.8% increase in the number of students taking algebra, respectively. And our smallest increase in the number of students in the population taking the test appear in algebra. From year to year, we have a 1.6% increase in 18, and actually a decline in the number of students taking the algebra test in 2019. Actually, I'm going to continue on the slide. So I now want to look at the actual grade 3 cohort for 2016-17. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the grade 3 cohort as grade 4, which would be 17-18, and then the students as grade 5, 18-19. So in looking at the grade 3 cohort in 2017, approximately 62% or greater of the students met or exceeded expectations for the assessment. At the same token, those same students in grade 4, we see a 13% increase in the number of students in the population that actually took the test. However, the number of students performing at levels 4 and 5 increased, but at the same token, the number of students performing at level 5 and level 1 declined. So if you look at those same students as grade 3 and grade 4 are students performing at a 4 or 5, that's the green and the blue. In 17-18, those same students as a level 5 have increased, have declined rather. Thank you. And then also at the same token, the students who were performing at a level 1, those also have declined. Looking at those same students in 18-19 as grade 5 students, there was a 9% increase in the student population that taking the assessment between grades 4 to 5. And the performance of the students at levels 4 and 5 again declined. The number of students performing at levels 5 and level 1, however, increased. Looking at the grade 4 cohort from 2016 through 2019, in 2017, we had roughly 75% of the population meeting or exceeding the grade level expectations. When we look at that same cohort as a grade 5 cohort, we see that there was a 2.5% increase in the student population taking the test between grades 4 and 5. But then the number of students performing at levels 4 and 5 remained relatively the same, while the number of students performing at level 5 increased, our level 1 and 2 population declined. So we had less students performing at levels 1 and 2. And then when we look at the grade 5 cohort and look at them compared to moving into grade 6, we're following the same students. There was a 16% increase in the student population taking the test between grades 5 and 6. The total number of students performing at levels 4 and 5 slightly declined at grade 6. However, the students performing at level 5 remained relatively unchanged, while levels 1 and 2 increased. So the number of students in that particular year, we had more students performing below proficiency. Okay. And next, we're going to look at our algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. From 2017 to 2018, the number of students performing, this is for Algebra 2, the number of students performing at levels 4 and 5 actually declined. At the same token, the number of students performing at levels 1 and 2 increased, while level 3 performance remained relatively the same. So basically, while we have more students taking the higher level maths, we now have a concern for me is the fact that as we're progressing, we see more students not performing at those higher level maths. So we need to look closer in terms of what is the root cause of that. 2018-19, there was a slight, we're still on Algebra 2, there was a slight increase of the number of students performing at level 4, while the remaining performance levels remained relatively unchanged across the years. In geometry, however, 2017-18, we saw an increase of the number of students performing at level 5, and we also saw that the number of students performing at levels 1 and 2 also increased. So again, what is the root cause of that? That's what we need to look further in determining why we have greater populations taking the courses, but what are we doing that we don't have the continued performance that we see at the lower grades in terms of the level of proficiency? And Algebra 1, in 2017-18, we had relatively the same number of students performing at level 4 across both years. And from 2018 to 19, while the number of students performing at level 5 were relatively the same as the previous year, the performance at level 4 slightly declined, where the performance at levels 1 and 2 again increased. So again, there's that concern of what's happening in our higher level maths. And as far as it relates to our targets, what we're doing next or our next steps, while we recognize that the district's performing better than the state, we also recognize that we need to look at our subgroup populations because that remains a challenge for us. At the same token, we need to identify the supports for all students, regardless of subgroup performance, that are performing at a level 3 or lower. Next steps are to actually observe K-12 classroom instruction to identify practices that are used to correct confusion, gauge and extend understanding, to see whether it's teacher pedagogy or some other root cause that may be causing the performance that we're seeing. We also want to look at how we are actually using formative assessment through our questioning techniques to drive instruction and identify whether we're actually correcting confusion and misconceptions as we're teaching versus teaching and then waiting until we have an assessment to identify what students didn't learn. We want to also work with special education and ESL departments to identify the supports that we need for those lower performing subgroups. Of course, we've taken on implementing iReady this year as a Tier 1 RTI, response to intervention support, and also as enrichment in grades K through 5. And we want to monitor that to see how it's actually causing students to show improvement across the diagnostics that we give. And then we also want to use Math Workshop as a model for differentiation in the elementary and middle schools to address some of the teaching and pedagogy so that we're reaching all students based upon their learning.
One last piece, very important piece. Maricela.
Thank you, Annie. So we've got all the data, and we are analyzing it at the district level, but it needs to distill down to the teachers, because that's where, you know, the major lift is and majority of the work is. So this is what we are doing. We know that assessments are an important part of the teaching and learning cycle. And those standardized testing is just one of many formative and summative assessments we use to monitor student growth over time. It is an important component because the New Jersey student learning assessments, they are aligned with the standards. And these standards are the grade level goals that ensure children gain appropriate skills each year for continual positive growth. So as part of the next steps, the content area supervisors, they are working with the 6 through 12 teachers on disaggregating the data during their monthly department meetings. Now with the K through 5 teachers, you know, it was a little difficult because we don't have department meetings with K through 5. So what we decided this year was to make use of our elementary curriculum Monday meetings. And the 4 core content curriculum supervisors, math, language arts, science, and social studies, we have taken 1 elementary school each, and we are working with the staff to disaggregate the data. Our first meeting with the elementary staff was on October 7th, and our second one is next week. So during this meeting on October 7th, this is what we did. Our session focused on examining the NJSLA score reports and determining the significant data points, as well as targeting standards for focused work in curriculum, instruction, and lesson implementation. We involved all K through 5 teachers, even though the testing doesn't start until grade 3. The rationale was that the K through 2 teachers, they are very important because they lay the foundation. And these next 2 slides, clearly illustrate that. These are the math domain progressions for the standards. And as you can see, the same concepts are spiraling up, starting from grade K, from kindergarten. So we felt, and it's absolutely true, that the K through 2 teachers, they are a very important part. It's not just the 3rd grade teacher who's responsible for the scores that the 3rd graders get. It's all the teachers which are part of that student's academic years. Same slide, similar slide for ELA, progression of the standards, spiraling curriculum. So we talked about, the district level disaggregation and the school level disaggregation, and that discussion led us to the second part of the pyramid, that is disaggregated data by subgroups. So our session focused on this second part, disaggregating data by subgroups. We looked at the school performance level summary. What I have over here for you is, as an example, is the district level summary. But for each school, we had their particular school's district level summary report. And the teachers worked in groups. We divided the teachers into 4 groups at each building. And in each group, there was a teacher from each grade level, K through 5. So with 6 people, 1 teacher from each grade level, so that they could see the progression and be part of the conversation. So teachers disaggregated this data and looked at identifying the gaps between the different subgroups. We did not talk about the causes yet, because the first part was just being able to identify, read the data, and identify where our gaps are. The second part of our conversation focused on item analysis. And in order to do that, we looked at evidence statement tables and evidence statements. These evidence statement tables and evidence statements, they describe the knowledge and skills that an assessment item or a task elicits from the students. And these are aligned directly to the state standards. As an example, this is what a district evidence statement analysis looks like. This gives the average % correct for district and the state. So you see 2 colors over here. The blue represents the state. The green represents the district. If this was a school level report, there would be a 3rd color data point. Generally, it's orange, and that represents the school's data point. So right on one chart, you can compare the state, the district, as well as the school. The questions over here are arranged from highest difficulty level to the least difficulty level. So you can see, the average correct percentage is increasing as you go from the most difficult to the least difficult. Now, sometimes just reading this, looking at this can be alarming, because the first thing that my eye goes to is this point over here, number 13, and oh my God, did nobody pass? But this particular report is useless unless and until we look at the accompanying form that goes with it. Because this chart, and I know looks a little busy and might be a little small, but I'm going to try and focus on number 13 that we were looking at. This gives you right over here that only 6 students in the entire district got that question. Yeah. Only 6 students for grade 4 got that question. So now if I go back over here, that 0, which it's difficulty level 13, doesn't look so bad. Right? And then if I look at number 19, number 19, I see, oh, wow, we did really well. But then I go over here and I look at number 19, I see 123 students got it. And over here, I think only about 50% of the students got that correct. So that is a standard that we would be definitely looking at rather than number 13, because that tells us that only 50% of the students, 123 students who got that question, got that correct.
Right.
So that's what we are focusing on, and during our next meeting, we are going to dig deeper into this data, and over the course of the years, because I know as a classroom teacher, when the data was presented to me, I just looked at it and I didn't know what the heck to do with it till somebody showed me how to read that data. And that's the purpose of our meeting with our staff members, to make sure that not only are we providing them with the data, but also the professional development that is required to be able to not only disaggregate, read the data, but then how do we use it? What do we do with it? All right. So.
Great.
That concludes our presentation, but if you're interested, we have enough data to fill another day. So any questions you have or any information you want, well, we can probably get it to you.
I just want to thank the entire team. Marigela, that last piece that you did, and I know this is, you're taking on multiple roles, science, professional development, testing, and assessment. So I really appreciate your focus on this. But the board needs to sort of fly at 30,000 feet with all of this. But the knowledge that our teachers in your hands are really taking a look at the data in a very objective way and drilling down into the item analysis. That's exciting to know that work is taking place. It's hard work, it's important work, and I really want to thank you for highlighting that, and all of our supervisors, Keisha, Stephanie, for really making sure that our teachers understand the importance of this data and how to use it. Some questions?
Great. Yep, Michelle?
I just want to say that presentation, even though a good part of it went over my head, was the most valuable piece of information and most valuable presentation that I've heard since I've been a member of this Board of Education. And I want to thank you very much, because we spend a lot of time guessing and listening to anecdotal it's not evidence, it's just what people think. And to actually have data that you are going to take and link to action to address some really distressing news that I thought I knew and now you just gave me the proof, is exciting to me. It instills me with hope, and I know it's going to be really hard work, but I encourage you to keep it up and let you know that this board member, and I suspect several of my colleagues, really appreciate you leading us in a way that helps us to take data and actually improve the teaching and learning for all of our kids. So thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, just to, thank you. And just to add, I have 4 notes from the 30,000-foot level. One is that I think the comparisons to the state are not particularly illuminating, because we're a high-performing district, and unless there's some change there in how we perform against the state average, I'm not sure what that tells us. A second thing is there are a number of slides about AP success, and I just wonder to what extent we want to be focused on AP success rather than a lot of other measures of success that we might consider to be more important. The third thing is, if it's possible at some point in the future, to learn more about individual student progress. I know if you delve deeply into some of those, you see that from year to year, some grades have more 4s and 5s, but I think that, from our perspective, knowing every child, what we really want to learn more about is how are our children progressing? And finally, I think this highlights incredibly starkly some of the equity challenges we have with respect to student achievement. And while there looks like there's been what I describe as modest improvement, the gaps remain quite breathtaking, even when you try to correct for, when you look at income, and I'm sure there are a lot of additional correlations that one could find. But that's my big takeaway is the equity gap remains large. The progress we're making is extremely modest, and I would, be interested in, learning more of the concrete efforts that we are going to put in place to address that at all grade levels.
Thank you. Evelyn?
But what is so exciting about this team and these fresh faces that are here, if we reel back to when we had the test that were you don't remember this.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So now we go back to the slide that shows, okay, math type 3, modeling and reasoning, number and operations, modeling and reasoning, number and operation. Oh yeah, number 13, only 4 people took that. So now we get real data in real time that this young lady on the end can pick away with for eternity, because there is more information than we can possibly pick away at. But the beautiful thing is, as each teacher gets the information, like you said, you got it and you didn't know what to do with. Now we're getting people in there to show our staff, look, this is where we were at, this is where we're going, this is why, these are the questions we're missing, this is what's happening. Michelle Waldron in Cranberry, we have a much smaller microcosm of this, but has worked with us for years in teaching us this. And I just find it incredibly exciting and incredibly tangible now for our teachers, rather than just putting numbers on their disc and saying, well, we're not hitting the numbers. Now it is, here are our numbers, here's where we're at, here's where we're going, here's where this didn't go well. Okay, what can we do? What else can we do? I just find it for education to have tangible quantitative numbers for our staff and our teachers to look at to say what works and what doesn't, to be an incredible step in the right direction.
Thank you, Evelyn, for that. And I just want to add that the response from the teachers as they are, the supervisors are doing this work with them, has been remarkable. They have embraced it. They want more. They're asking for more. They're looking deeply. And Brian, you were talking about drilling down to the student level. That's exactly what we need to do, is to look down at that level, and that is our work to do. And it's something that's on our plate and we are well aware of.
I had one question on the APs. It's not all the APs taken, right? It was just the English?
No.
All the APs that were taken?
Yes. That was the number of students.
611 students, and then
Took 1,400.
and then over 1,400 tests taken by 611 students.
All
So
right.
an
I thought
average
it
of
would be
2.5
higher.
tests per student.
Betsy?
Go ahead.
Debbie, there were more students enrolled in AP classes, but those charts show the test takers. So not all students take the test.
Okay. I just thought it would be more. Thank you.
Thank you all. In Student Achievement, we got to hear a preview of this, and we really appreciate your work. I'm really heartened. One of you mentioned teacher pedagogy. I think it was Stephanie. I'm really heartened by the way we can use best practices within our own district to teach all of the teachers in the district. We have so many amazing things happening in our classrooms, and so I'm hoping as you sort through all the data and look at what's happening school to school, classroom to classroom, that sharing, even especially teachers in different schools sharing with one another, would be really great. Thanks.
Jess?
Yeah, I just also wanted to echo the thanks and the excitement about the idea that the conversation that you're taking to your colleagues is about how to understand what the data are telling us. And in some cases, I think that I think there's lots that we want to continue to keep an eye on, and also recognize that in some cases it's telling us something about the test more than it's telling us something about our students. So I hope we keep that in our minds as we think about what we do, about what we learn, and also put in a note of encouragement about the student growth objectives, SGOs, I think you referred to them. I feel like that's the place where maybe the more we can focus on what those are for each student, then we can really be assessing are we meeting those, which would tell us that that each of our students is achieving according to the path that we've established with them is about joy and purpose and objectives that they've identified for themselves, which hopefully can take many shapes in addition to APs. So I think that there's lots to be hopeful for in terms of thinking about what do we do with this data, and I think we all need to think really hard about where we're talking about standardized test data, understanding the difference between what it's telling us about the test versus what it's telling us about our students. Thank you.
Question, do you have the AP results for the other tests, not just English? Like, you had some really good numbers for English, but what about math, chemistry, econ, languages? I mean,
We have all of those numbers, and we can get those to you. And actually, I have them right here on a sheet of paper, but I won't go through them all.
I mean, were they equally as impressive as English?
Yes.
Just generally?
Yes.
I know chemistry always does well,
Mhm.
but I don't know about all the rest of them.
Yeah. We have all of that, and
Okay.
yes, they were equally impressive, yes.
Anyone else? I actually had just a question, and what really struck me was the gap, and the gap in particular with the income levels. And I guess, I mean, it's really quite shocking. And what percentage of our population is free and reduced lunch, the low income? Is it 18, 20?
It's probably 13%.
13%.
Yeah.
So you have this enormous gap, right, between, and that seemed to be a very big determining factor. I'm just wondering whether you can drill down by grade, and so we could see the gap in each grade, and so if there's a delta or a change in any one particular year, we might have a better sense of programs that we're doing and supports that we're giving and how that's possibly affecting it. And I'm wondering also, I think, Betsy, you've asked this question before, do we have a baseline? Is there a way that we can look at that from when we get the children? When they come to us in pre-K or K, is there some sort of assessment that gives us a sense of, are we making any progress at any level? What's changing on the delta every year, rather than looking at K to 12? So I would be interested in that.
I just note that my understanding of what, how we define low income are families where the students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And I think there are, especially in this community, clearly families above that line who are also struggling and who would, have some of the same challenges. So as we talk about that number, I just think we need to talk about it in perhaps a broader way than the narrow definition of qualification for free and reduced lunch.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I just wanted to thank you again, and I appreciated we talk about a strength-based approach for our students, where we identify the strengths of our students and then build on those, and I did appreciate the way in which all of you sort of took a strength-based approach with our teaching and looking for the highlights, the good practices, and then how you can share those. So for there are teachers out there who I'm sure are doing an exceptional job with all of our students, and maybe seeing some growth with our students who might be economically disadvantaged, and what are they doing that we can then try and replicate in other classrooms. But it sounds like you're really trying to adopt that approach, so thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one quick question, and that is, I think that Jess makes a good point, is that the test, looking at test scores tells us a lot about the test. It doesn't always tell us about how our kids are doing, and I'm wondering what other kind of data, because the gap is stunning, but unfortunately the gap's been stunning for the past 20 years, so this isn't news. But I'm wondering if there's other data that you can look at or that you have access to besides test scores that can tell a story or shed some light on why it's so significant and remains so stubbornly significant over all these years.
What I'd like to speak to is the fact that the test score is exactly that. We are looking at students' answers and responses to a question and not necessarily gauging their learning. Several teachers at the high school will be working with a school in New York, in which I was working with in the past year, where they actually received a waiver from the state of New York, where their students no longer have to take the state standardized test. What they are actually doing are performance-based assessment tasks, where they're taking real-world problems and using their knowledge that they've learned over the course of their 4 years in math, science, and so forth, and they're actually almost putting together something as significant as a thesis, and they're being judged and graded on their ability to use their skills to solve their hypothesized problem. So that's one way that we can look differently if we progress at looking more at real-world problems and giving students more real-world problems than just, did you get the right response on the question? And that's something that we're looking at in the math department from middle school up in terms of the math that we're teaching, and are we now assessing students' ability to be able to apply that math versus just being able to solve the problem?
I'd just like to add and reiterate sort of what Jess was saying. This was a report on standardized testing. That's what you heard tonight. But this is just one small measure of how we evaluate students and how we assess them. The most important things that are done are the formative assessments done daily in the classroom. And we have good records of those things, and that's how we should be following students in their academic path in that way. This is just one small measure, but it gives us good information.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was very informative. We appreciate it. We're going to now move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next item of business?
Very quickly, referendum projects, we committed to a monthly sharing with the community as to where we are with the finances on our referendum. We don't have a lot of change from last month, but Matt, if you want to just walk us through that.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So as a written part of the report, as the agenda, you'll see my analysis every month. We track it all the time. The real big change from last month, which was the first month, was we're working through the PSE&G change order. We got estimates on a road that came in significantly higher than we first thought. So now they're so close to actually just moving the transformer that that's a possibility, but that decision has not been made yet. We are still positive financially to upwards of $363,000 at this point. It's a constantly moving target, and we are tracking that actively.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Yeah, I had one question. So when we go to BP5, like the JW Middle School, will you break out the different things, like the nurses area and the old library?
So we do look at all the different little pieces of it. We're trying to keep, I like to do one-pagers, even with
Okay.
things as big as our budget, but we'll always look at the complete picture behind the summary and can give you guys that as we go forward.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah.
Of
yeah.
course.
That'd be great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're going to move on to committee reports, and we're going to start with our students.
Good evening, everyone. So we're currently still awaiting approval on our first survey of the year, but as we wait to administer it, we'd like to just begin by discussing the progress we've made on some of our goals that we outlined in earlier meetings, some events and initiatives Student Council currently has in the works, as well as the upcoming survey that we'll be conducting over the coming weeks. So at our first meeting, Mateo and I agreed that finding ways to alleviate stress at PHS would be one of our core focuses for the year. And we noted that the broader goal of Student Council at PHS is to, to build and enrich school culture, whether it be through events, fundraisers, or different types of outreach programs. But we believe that these events, when done successfully, can have a significant positive impact on some of our more specific goals. And we think that by sticking to this year's themes of community building and school-wide engagement, we think that the initiatives that Student Council undertakes to build school culture will contribute to our goal of creating a less stressful and less overwhelming academic environment. And we think that it's really a chain reaction. So when there exists like a stronger community and a closer, more positive student-to-student relationship, it'll lead to happier students, which leads to more enjoyment in school, which can lead to better performance, so on and so forth. And we've had a good start this year in terms of school-wide events. So Spirit Week and Homecoming were both successful and well-attended, and they're a great way to test out the use of incentives in encouraging event participation. The success of Fall Fest put the school spirit that lies within our clubs and student-run groups on full display. Clubs were able to raise large sums of money while also advocating for their clubs to the rest of the student body. Activities for the Kindness Project and Send Hunger Packing, which were both organized by the Student Council, turned out well as part of the school-wide community service day that was held following the PSAT. And Student Council has several future initiatives that are currently in the works, each of which is designed to embody our stronger focus that we want to put on community building and school-wide engagement. We think they can play a vital role in addressing the goals that we've outlined to the board this year. So to list a few, a date for Mr. PHS, which is our annual male beauty and talent pageant, has been set. We're really excited about this event because its success is derived completely from the participation of different clubs. And it's also a great fundraiser. We're also hoping to introduce a new activity. I'll actually give it to you. Yeah.
So going off of what Charlie said, we're also hoping to introduce new activities like a possible March Madness viewing party / tournament, still in the works, and as well as trivia nights, which we hope will be very popular at PHS, especially because we have a very competitive school nature, which I think is, as all you, yeah.
On your stripe.
So at our most recent student council meeting on Wednesday, October 23rd, we discussed festive events like candygrams as we approach the winter break, and as well as several other holiday celebrations. The meeting also saw mentions of a mini golf tournament and also other planned murals around the school that will take place as we approach winter break, as mentioned before. It's important to note that these projects and activities are almost always voluntary and are designed to create more opportunities for students to find relaxation and stress relief within the school community. Doing so can alleviate the sense of being overwhelmed, at the same time also building a more tight-knit community with the school and the student body. So obviously it's no secret that at PHS, Student Council has also had some difficulty in the past organizing new events that are widely attended, despite the heavy promotion and thorough planning of Student Council. Fixing this problem is where our first survey will come in. Over the next week or so, we hope to collect data from the student body that can be used to influence and also shape any events we're planning for the future. The survey will provide us with other data regarding the types of events that student body feels are missing at PHS, along with any other activities that they would be most willing to participate in. The data is meant to inform us on how students would prefer to hear about events and what other methods of advertising and outreaches they would find most compelling. And in terms of what we want to figure out from the students is why they've been so discouraged, just in terms of participation over the years in the student council-run events. We're also looking to foster a stronger sense of community among the student body, as mentioned before, which is the main goal of our survey, just to see what the students want and have us as student council take initiative for what they want. Excuse me. And so many of you, in conclusion, actually, many of you have also contacted us expressing interest in meeting, whether it be one-on-one or just both Charlie and I. And so we really hope to get that started in the future. And we also hope to be more proactive in planning and scheduling these meetings, especially following the early college application deadline that both Charlie and I had. So that is, yeah, that was, that's Friday. I submitted my applications tonight, so I'm done. I think Charlie submitted most of his too, so we're getting there. And we'd also really like to organize a Meet the Board event at Princeton High School, so that's something we're going to be talking to you guys about that. And we're very happy to see the high level of interest the board has had in us as the student body representatives this year, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. Mateo?
I have extra copies.
Yeah, I did want to say, as a parent, for stress on my part and your part, if you need, go home and do your applications, go do them.
Right.
Because I have my own senior.
I
so-
clicked submit tonight, so I was like so happy.
Seriously.
I saw the financial deadlines, and I'm like, oh, got more to do. Fine.
Maybe you need to sleep now. So whatever you guys need to do, you consider yourself excused. We're very happy.
Question, what is the date of the Mr. PHS?
I
Oh, you were thinking of the two things you have to
Charlie might, yeah.
While he's looking, did we not at our last board meeting say that we were going to
them
move
forward.
these guys forward before
Yeah.
a presentation in case they need to leave?
Yeah.
Also, we have more people here at the very beginning, so it's good
So
for.
before the presentation.
Yeah, so.
we can do that.
Right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm still focused on the kids.
I just,
You got
my
that,
last.
Matt? Can we do that? Yeah. Okay.
I believe it's in the spring, but
You
yeah.
let us know. That's
Yeah.
fine. Okay. Let's, then we'll move on. Thanks, guys. We'll move on to equity. Equity, is there a new equity report this week or not?
No.
Okay. Last week. Facilities, Greg?
Sure, I'll just provide a very quick overview. And number one is I wanted to thank again Dave Harding, our Director of Facilities, who for his presentation at our last meeting. This is part of an ongoing review and an ongoing sort of update for the public and for the board, not just the referendum, but on maintenance as well. Two, I just wanted to point out something that we'll be hearing a lot of, I know, but that every 3 years, districts here in New Jersey are reviewed by the state through the QSAC process, which is the Quality Single Accountability Continuum. And it's a very comprehensive process. Princeton is now undergoing that. And so I know that Dave Harding, along with Matt, and along with everyone else here, is working on all the different components. One of the components is on maintenance and facilities. And so I just wanted to point that out, but also just thank everyone for working so hard on that. And we'll be hearing more about that. And the third thing is very quickly, I just wanted to also just thank Matt and Brian for putting together that schedule that is in every packet here now. It's hard to put up, but it's the schedule that Matt talked about in terms of where we are on the referendum. It's updated every month. It's dated, so you can see and track the progress. And I just wanted to, for the public.
It's on board docs, right?
It's on board docs, so please take a look at that. It's a wonderful resource in order to make sure that people are aware of exactly where we are in the referendum process. And so thank you to both of you.
Right? You're talking about the
Excel dollars, yeah.
Yes. Yep. And then with that, I thought I would ask Steve if you wanted to talk a little bit about.
About the
Yeah.
a little bit about the schedule for referendum projects at the K through 8 level. Really, there are three major projects that we're looking at. One is installation of doors with security enhancements. Two is the construction of the security vestibules, K through 8, and then the third area is the HVAC installation. So in terms of timing, and please jump in, Brian, Greg, if you'd like. We're looking to do the installation of the doors, the security enhanced doors, in this coming spring of 2020, and that work would occur largely over holidays, ideally, or in the evening, so as not to disrupt instruction. The security vestibules are scheduled to take place. This is all pending, acceptance of our bids, but take place this summer at all 4 elementaries, including NJW as well. And then the HVAC installation is where we stepped back and really thought about the best way to proceed, and made the decision to to move ahead with HVAC installation at CP, at Littlebrook, and at JW this summer of 2020, and to postpone, I think prudently, the installation of HVAC at Johnson Park. And the reason for that is at least twofold. There may be a third reason. One, we feel that we can better manage the comprehensive installation of HVAC across 3 buildings versus 4 all at the same time. We're trying to take the lessons learned from our Riverside experience, and that was the reason that we started with 1 school. So we feel we can manage it better. And then the other, even more critical reason is that JP has been the home to all of our summer programs for many years. And so we have literally hundreds of students who participate in summer programming, whether it's extended school year for our students with special needs, or the LEAP program, or Jump Start for students who benefit from extra instruction in the summer. But virtually all of the classrooms at JP are being used. And so the initial thought was, we can't move all of those classrooms to Riverside. We would still have students who might needed to be in the JP building, and we don't want to have students in construction mixing. So the only way we can have sufficient swing space, we call it, for all of our summer programs at the elementary level is to hold off on doing JP for 1 summer, do the other elementary schools, and then we'll have plenty of space for the summer programs at the elementary schools that are complete. It also is nice that because JP has had summer programs, it also is farther along with higher level AC. Granted, it's just the window units and not the wonderful Airedale units we'll be putting in, but they're in a better place than the other elementary schools in terms of air conditioning. And if there are good air conditioners, better ones that we harvest, so to speak, from the installation of the new HVAC, then we can always place those in the JP building. So we've had a conversation with the referendum review team at JP, including parents and staff, and so they're on board with that recommendation, but I wanted to share it with the full board. Any questions? Any comments?
Well, just one note. I think earlier today we learned that the current lead time on doors is in the neighborhood of 20 to 22 weeks. And once they arrive, they need to sit for 3 to 4 weeks in the buildings they're going to be installed in to acclimate. So if you add those numbers up,
we're at tight time scale.
We could be in the early summer for the doors and the hardware as well as the vestibules.
Yep.
But I can just tell you that we promised a very robust referendum update quarterly, and the last one was September 24th. That would put us at the end of December and early January. We're going to move that up to one of the 2 board meetings in December. A little bit will depend on how heavy the December 17th meeting is, but that's when we would expect to award bids if we get at the right level and qualified bids for the JW project and the HVAC in the 3 elementaries, which are being bid as 2 elementaries with JP as an alternate. We can either accept that or we can bid JP separately in the future. And we would expect to bid the vestibules and door hardware on November 19th. And there's a lot going on right now, so I'm hoping that in advance of the full presentation to the board and the public, that I'll be able to work with Dave and Matt and the professionals to get the board a more robust update on all of the moving parts. I would say that one thing that the Facilities Committee has really started to focus on and will continue to focus on is having 4 active projects with 4 different contractors working in 6 schools over the summer is going to be very, very challenging. The summer sounds like a long period of time. People think of it as 12 weeks. If we want to have the end date for substantial completion be August 14th, which would be 3 weeks before the start of school, that means there are 37 work days. So there can be discussions about weekends and evenings, but that would add to the cost. So there's a lot of, there are many challenges in getting all of that work done perfectly in a world where we're obligated to accept the contractor with the lowest bid, and the range in contractor quality is quite high, and it's the single biggest driver of a successful project. So we're spending a lot of time talking about what are the things that we, the district, can do, what are the things that Epic, our construction manager, can do, and that Scott and Spiesel can do to set us up for success. And one thing is putting milestones in the bid packages, which then become part of the contracts, which gives gives Epic a bit more to grab hold of, since what they do is they don't get to manage the contractors, they manage to the contract, which is, we can talk more about how that works. But there's a lot of time and attention going into doing everything we can to make these projects as successful as possible. But 6 schools, 50 to 100 years old, under-maintained, there are going to be challenges that no matter how hard we work, we will not foresee and will have to address when they come up.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. Moving on, Finance, Bill?
Finance Committee met Monday, October 28th, yesterday at Valley Road in an open meeting. We reviewed the bills and financial reports of the district. We also discussed a number of financial-related topics, including an authorization for the board secretary to pay certain invoices in advance of the monthly board meeting, which led to an interesting discussion of how we ensure that we're protected from both internal and external financial fraud. We shared some anecdotes of stuff we've heard about going on elsewhere. The board secretary is going to look at our procedures and report back in time. We also discussed the ongoing shared service efforts between the district and the town, which led to a question as to whether there would be a benefit to examining shared services with other school districts in the area. We concluded with the discussion of purchase of some new school buses, and our next meeting is November 18th, 8:30 at Valley Road in an open meeting to which the public is invited.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions? Personnel, Debbie?
The Personnel Committee met on Monday, October 21st. The committee discussed several staffing requests that are on the agenda for approval tonight: a part-time aide at JP, a full-time aide at JP, and 2 communication interns, which will be filled by college students to assist in communication within the district. These positions will end June 2020. A sick leave bank approval is also on the agenda tonight, and I want to thank all the PPS employees who donated to the sick leave bank in September. The committee discussed aid stipends for the 2019-2020 school year, which are also on the agenda for approval. The committee has started discussing recommended changes to the non-tenure review process that is presented to the Personnel Committee in April. One thought is a template with more relevant information from the administrators. This will be an ongoing discussion. Mike shared with the committee that CUSAC monitors will be visiting the district in February 2020 to look at personnel, and his department has been gathering all the documentation that is needed by October 31st, 2019. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, November 13th.
Thank you, Debbie. Any questions? No? Student achievement, or policy, I'm sorry, policy. Greg and Jess?
Sure, I'll start off. On the agenda for tonight, there's 4 policies for first reading. They're all from personnel. They're all part of our transition to our new policy manual. There's 9 policies for second reading. All of them are the same as what we saw last meeting, except for a modification in Policy 4216, evaluation, at the request of our chair of our Personnel Committee, and it was to add a definition. And I just wanted to thank Mike for his review of this, along with Lou Goldstein as well, and the Policy Committee's hard work on all this. So, and with that, I wanted to hand it over to the co-chair.
Sure. I just want to, in the service of the work that we've been doing around vaping education in the community, in the interest of the work we've been doing around vaping, I want to make sure everyone is aware that we, Princeton Public Schools, along with JW, HUN, Stewart, PDS, Corner House, the police, and the health department, are sponsoring What You Need to Know About Vaping, an event on November 25th, 7 to 9 p.m. in the PHS PAC, the Performing Arts Center. All families are invited and encouraged to attend. And there's information about the event on the town and health department website, and I'll make sure that we put that up on the school's website as well, including there is a survey on the town website which anyone who's interested in this event is encouraged to fill out. The questions include, what questions do you have about vaping? What are you interested in learning about? Do you plan on attending? Do you plan on bringing children to the event? And the survey is being put out so that we can we can ensure that the questions that the community has about this very kind of as we day to day, the issue is emerging. And so we want to answer the questions that people have now that they feel haven't been answered. So please fill out the survey and encourage everyone to attend.
Thank you, Jess.
And policy, the next policy meeting is open, but it's a little bit different than our usual meeting time. It's Wednesday, November 6th at 8 o'clock, 8:30? 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
we're taking up technology policies as well at the advice of our technology steering committee.
Great, thank you. All right. Student achievement, Betsy?
Yes, thanks. The Student Achievement Committee met Friday, October 11th at 11:30 a.m. Jessica Baxter, PHS principal, attended Student Achievement to articulate the needs of our high school students who are new to schools of the United States, and she shared how the PHS Welcome Center helps these students academically. Aside from academic support, however, the students often need counseling service, and sometimes in Spanish. Jessica shared that this year, the high school has an opportunity to work with Rutgers through the Princeton Family Institute, and that it is a priority of our high school to help provide services to these students. So while the Princeton Family Institute has provided services to Princeton High School over the past 3 years, this is more in depth with these counseling services to be run through the PHS ESL Welcome Center. So members of the Princeton Family Institute came to our meeting as well. The board members in attendance supported the superintendent and principal's recommendation that the work begin at PHS this fall. Part of the cost of this program is being covered by another foundation, but the district portion of the cost is on tonight's agenda item M3. A PHS student attended Student Achievement to present her research proposal on PPS staff knowledge of students' anaphylactic allergies. The Student Achievement Committee asked the student to return, thanked her for this research, and we'd like to hear any recommendations for improving district practice related to better supporting students with life-threatening allergies. Mrs. Baxter, the PHS principal, spoke with us about 2 additional topics, and we really appreciated her time. One is questions about limited course selection that students are experiencing this year. She made clear this is not new. If a student has wanted a second lab science, they have always been added to a list that's reviewed at the end of September each year. This is to ensure that all students have access to courses they need for graduation, and it's been in place for some time. We also hold some spots in these requirements for students who may move to Princeton throughout the year who need these for graduation. And she also reminded us that we have to walk the walk on wellness, and we have to ensure that students who double up on lab science have a true passion for the subject. She also spoke about school spirit, but reframed the discussion in terms of inclusion and school climate. We congratulated her to a great start to the school year and thanked her for attending. Keisha Smith-Carrington, who we heard from tonight, our supervisor of K-8 language arts, attended to explain why she was requesting professional development for JW language arts teachers. We did approve this at the October 15th full board meeting, and as she said, I believe she said it starts this Friday at JW. We've had a number of questions regarding the school calendar. We discussed this in Student Achievement, and it is a process. I would like for the process to move as quickly as possible. There's a lot of moving parts, one being the referendum projects next summer. We hope, Annie and I will be putting this on the November agenda, and it always has 2 readings in front of the board. So I know Steve reaches out to leadership within our district, and so I'm not sure if it'll come to the board in November or December, but it is a 2-month process, and we hope to wrap up the calendar for 2021. Can't believe we're already at those years, but here we are, 2020 next year. So the next Student Achievement meeting is November 15th at 11:30, and the public is encouraged to attend.
Thank you. I have one comment, and that is I'm getting a lot of questions on the calendar too. And even if we don't have the full calendar decided, if we can tell people when it starts,
We can probably do that.
that would be helpful. I think people would appreciate that. So the sooner we can do that, the better. Now we're on to public forum. Do we have anyone who wants to speak? It's agenda items. If none, then we are going to start moving very quickly because it's 9:40. We have a lot to get through, and we also have another closed session at the end, so to talk about negotiations. So item K, I'm just going to read the item numbers. These are all consent items, and I will go rather quickly. If you would like to have a discussion, just jump in, okay? Item K, first reading are the policies that are up for first read. They're listed. The second, item K2, is the policies up for second reading, which are listed in the agenda. Item L, personnel, resolution to create positions, the suspension of a staff member. Item 3, appointments. Item 4, resignations. Item 5, leaves of absence. Item 6, termination. Item 7, retirement payout PRESA. Item 8, tuition reimbursements. Item 9, sick leave bank. Item 10, school improvement panels. Item 11, stipends for instructional age. Item 12, student services hourly work. Item 13, curriculum and instruction hourly work. Item 14, non-athletic EPES. Item 15, athletic EPES. Item M1, acceptance of grant funds. Item 2, educational consultant, Heinemann Seminars. Item 3, educational consulting services, Princeton Family Institute. And item N1, professional consulting services, 2019-20. 2, settlement agreement. 3, revised educational placement of special needs pupils. 4, educational placement of special needs pupils, 2019-20. 5, educational placement of pupils, 2019-20. 6, grant application carryover IDEIA. Item O1, financial reports. Consent item. Item 2, comprehensive maintenance plan, 2019-20. Item 3, cooperative purchase.
I have a question on 3. 3 and 4, so should I wait till you say 4?
3 and 4, they're both for buses.
Okay. So I was curious with 4, did we have a bus that we got rid of, or, because it says it's replacing?
Yeah.
So I didn't know who's paying for that, or,
The insurance company.
is it?
Yeah, do you want to speak to that?
Go ahead.
Oh, that's the one that got
It's the
crashed?
25 passenger bus.
Not the one that crashed.
Oh.
We will be purchasing, so we replaced two
Mike.
school buses we brought them. Oh, I'm sorry. We replaced 2 school buses, which we brought to the previous finance committee. We have buses aging out and that don't work well. We had a bus accident, no one was hurt, thank
Right.
goodness, and that bus was totaled by insurance company. That was the discussion that Bill mentioned at the end of the finance committee. We will be replacing that very shortly. It's still sitting out there, and we sold it for $2,000 to another, but it was totaled by the insurance company, so that will be paid for out of insurance funds.
Okay, so the 1 and 4, I'm sorry,
3
the
and
bus listed on 4, it doesn't say how it's getting paid.
They were budgeted.
Okay, because
They're-
it just doesn't say that.
Okay, yes, out of the operating transportation budget.
There's a limit on the age of our buses, so we're required after a certain number of years to age them out. So we plan for
15
that.
years.
So, you know what I would love? I would love, because every time buses come up, and then the one above it, it does say that it's budgeted. But is there, could we get like a spreadsheet that lists the buses and the ages and just knowing future where they're going? Because for me, when it says it's budgeted, I feel like when we did the budget, I don't remember seeing anything for buses for this much. So 63,000 plus 58,000. So,
Yeah, we do have
I'm
an
just
act-
saying.
Mhm. We do have an active list of all the buses with their ages.
Okay. That'd be great just to see. Okay. And then, all right, so we're still getting a new one, but that's coming from the insurance company.
Yes.
Okay. And this one in number 4, though, don't you usually put in budgeted?
Yes.
Like under type? Okay, so that's just missing?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
You're welcome.
So that's item 3 and 4. Item 5.
Number 2, the comprehensive maintenance plan
Yes.
is unbelievable. That's, just as a facilities chair, that comprehensive maintenance plan is the tidiest, best maintenance plan I've seen. It's really phenomenal. I'm just going to say that.
Okay, thank you. Item 5, we're on bus safety drills. Item 6, fire and evacuation drills. Item 7, travel and related expenses. And that brings us to item P, consent vote. Can I have a motion? Greg, second. Jess? Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, we need to do a roll call. We have HR items.
Beth Barrett,
Yes.
Debbie Bronfeld,
Yes.
Dan Dart,
Yes.
Jessica Deutsch,
Yes.
Bill Hare,
Yes.
Betsy Calver Baglio,
Yes.
Brian McDonald,
Yes.
Greg Stankiewicz,
Yes.
Michelle Tuck Ponder,
Yes.
and Evelyn Spahn.
Yes.
Our consent agenda passes.
Thank you. Now we're into public comment again, open topics. That brings us to the appointment of our Cranberry Board representative. So we now are in Evelyn, it's time to go. After all that. So, Peter, I would like to welcome Peter Katz to our board. Peter is a Cranberry Board member, attorney, a father of 3, 2 at PHS and 1 in first grade, with 7 years of school board experience, having been elected 4 times and appointed twice to serve on the Cranberry and Upper Freehold regional districts. Peter brings extensive professional experience in litigation, white-collar criminal defense and compliance work, having served for nearly a decade as a assistant U.S. attorney for both the District of New Jersey and the Eastern District of New York, where he led investigations and prosecutions related to healthcare, bank, tax, wire, mail, and insurance fraud. Peter also prosecuted matters involving money laundering, bank robbery, narcotics, and weapons trafficking conspiracies, as well as RICO, capital murder, public corruption, and obstruction of justice. On a lighter note, I enjoyed reading that. On a lighter note, Peter has also served on his local Little League board, mentored Odyssey of the Mind teams, coached youth soccer, baseball, and basketball, and is a dedicated dance dad, which we want to know more about. We look forward to benefiting from Peter's professional expertise and dedication to students as he joins the Princeton Board of Ed as our new Cranberry representative. So welcome, Peter. Thank you, Evelyn.
Do the motion, then I'll go up and read the.
Now I will motion. I need a motion to approve the appointment of the Cranberry Board representative. Brian?
Can I make that motion? Am I allowed?
I think you can, yes.
I think you can.
Evelyn, do we have a second?
Sure.
Brian? All those in favor, show of hands. Okay.
Unanimous.
Motion passed. Welcome. Goodbye. And now, I think we will administer the oath of office to our new board member.
I, Peter Katz,
I, Peter Katz,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey.
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance
I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the same and to the governments
to the same and to the governments
established in the United States and this state
established in the United States and this state,
under the authority of the people.
under the authority of the people.
So help me God.
So help me God.
I, Peter Katz,
I, Peter Katz,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of the Board of Education.
that's too much. That I possess
I possess.
It's late at night, come on. I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all of the duties of that office according to the best of my abilities, so help me God.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a warm seat for you, right?
Expect nothing less.
I know, it's like Christmas.
All right, and welcome, Peter.
Welcome.
Welcome. Hi. Peter.
That's really cool.
Hi, everybody.
So our next item is to, now that we have a new member, we're going to talk again about our communications charter. Can I have a motion? Jess, second. Betsy? I think we'll have some discussion about our communications charter. As we all know, and Peter will learn, we had several retreats earlier this year with Jesse Adams from the New Jersey School Board Association. And as part of that, we used a form that Jesse brought to us that helped us kind of talk through how we communicate with each other, what we expect of each other, what the superintendent can expect of us, how we work on our agendas, how we whether we show up at the sites of schools or not, and how we have to announce ourselves, and how we communicate with the community. So I think that I'm not sure the best way to go through this, or if anyone has any particular questions. We had a copy attached. I know Dan has a question. We've got Steve Fogarty, our counsel, here for the closed session. Steve, do you want to come forward? Because maybe there's going to be some legal questions about this. It'd be great if you maybe want to just take a seat. Oh, if you want to sit at the table. Yeah, he can sit at the end. Okay, all right. So, did we want to go through this, or how do we want to do this in the interest of time? It hasn't really changed, no. It's reflecting now the comments. There were some points where I think we added in the second section, where the superintendent expects in item 4 and 5, we did best efforts to read all supporting documents rather than must or will. And then I think the only other thing was we added in under board and community communications, item 2, a clarification to ensure that what we share will be accurate and intended for the public. And it's about confidential information, including information prepared for deliberative purposes will not be shared. And if there's any question whether information is confidential, board members will consult with the superintendent in advance. Because the superintendent and the board president are the only people who can actually get legal advice if there's a question. So that was why that was suggested. But I think, Dan, you had a question about that.
Well, I think that, I think most of it is fine. My issue is really with the board community communications portion of it, particularly paragraph 2. And I want to reference our board goals, which go back where we say, we're going to communicate in an open and in a transparent manner, and this seems to pull us away from it. The other concern I have is it.
Can we just hit that one first? So how does this pull us away from being transparent?
Well, it just looks like it's trying to reduce communications by individual board members.
But how would that be?
Anyway, let me finish and then we can talk about it. The second thing is that. It doesn't define, for example, confidentiality, doesn't reference the Open Public Meeting Act or the Open Public Record Act. It's not up to us, either individually or as a board, to determine what's confidential or not. It's driven by state law.
Steve, do you want to speak to that?
I will. First of all, good evening, everybody.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. So with regard to the Open Public Meetings Act, the Open Public Meetings Act establishes what we can do.
There you go.
The Open Public Meetings Act establishes those subject matters that can be discussed in public and those that can be discussed in executive session. I see the proposed board community communications as being specific with regard to the governance of the board members individually. And I do not think that the Open Public Meetings Act in any way would be affected by establishing what the guidelines are for our own communications. So the issue with regard to confidentiality, as I understand it here, is that if you are going to, as a board member, if you are going to express yourself, if you're going to communicate in some way, either publicly or with a third person, you have an obligation to ensure that the information that you are disclosing is factually correct, and also that that you do not disclose anything of a private nature or a confidential nature. That is very different from what governs our practices with regard to our meetings. I think we're conflating the two things. The Open Public Meetings Act establishes what we do in public, what we can do in executive session. Those exceptions are defined by statute. When we talk about communications by board members, which is what I believe that this policy is intended to establish reasonable guidelines for. You need to be sensitive we all need to be sensitive to not disclosing information which is privileged, confidential, of a private nature. Very different from what we do as a board. So I don't think that the Open Public Meetings Act is implicated by that. Nor do I think that the Open Public Records Act, OPRA, I don't believe that's implicated by that either. The Open Public Records Act actually establishes what the public has access to. And in some ways, they don't have access to information that is confidential or private, but also very different from what this policy, I think, is intended to direct itself to. This policy is intended to make sure that we as board members do not transgress those lines of what is private, what is confidential. And if there is any question, I think that the provision in the policy which indicates that the board member should discuss that with the superintendent is not for the purpose of restricting a board member's expression of opinion or communication, but where a board member may not be certain, may not be clear about what is confidential, then the superintendent or the board president would be the individuals that you would communicate with, because under your policy, they are the only ones that can communicate with me. And so ultimately, I think this is all kind of a safety net for board members. You know, it's really intended to ensure that if you're about to communicate and you're uncertain about the content of what you're communicating about, that it may be privileged, it may be confidential, that it may be part of the advisory, consultative, and deliberative process, which is frankly a little more tricky than that which is private or confidential. That you have the opportunity to speak with the superintendent, your chief executive officer, or your board president. They would then seek the advice of myself as to whether or not that information could be disclosed. So again, I think it's all intended really to protect the members of the board, to ensure that if you are going to communicate, that you communicate in a way, very honestly, that doesn't get you into trouble. And that's my understanding of what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, for me personally, I would like to see, you know, to know what standard you're being held to. You know, confidentiality as defined by the Open Public Meetings Act, meaning if it's public, it's not confidential. If it's in closed session, it is confidential. Or if there's a record that is available to the public as part of OPRA, by definition, that's a public document. And then, you know, we signed on to the Code of Ethics, which has definitions about, you know, what is, for example, accurate information. Like an opinion is an opinion, not accurate, is not held to that same standard. So it just seems to me this is vague enough, and we've already sworn a constitutional oath, as Peter just did, and signed on to the Code of Ethics. And so I don't know if this is just redundant or what.
So well, let me say this first off. I think that when it comes to issues of the Code of Ethics, and it comes to issues of what board members can disclose as part of their communications, I think redundancy is a good thing. You know, I think redundancy is a good thing because it reinforces what we can and cannot do. And certainly you are held to the Code of Ethics. But I think this goes, but I think that this policy or these guidelines really supplement the Code of Ethics in terms of what you can communicate about. And I don't think that the Open Public Meetings Act defines what you can communicate with each other or to a third party about. Again, what I want to emphasize is that the Open Public Meetings Act does not establish it does not establish the restrictions or the requirements for our communications with each other. The Open Public Meetings Act establishes the requirements or the restrictions with regard to what we can discuss in closed session and what we have to do as a predicate to that and what we can discuss in public session. So, and neither does OPRA. The distinctions and the requirements are different in terms of those statutes and this policy. This policy, as I understand it, is really intended to speak to our own governance, what we expect from one another, how we expect each other, what our expectations are in terms of how we will communicate with each other, and what we will communicate outside of our communications with each other, what you will disclose to the public, what you will disclose to a third party. And I think that the policy is intended really to not only give guidance, but also to be prophylactic, so that if you're uncertain about something that you are going to communicate, you have the opportunity to say to the superintendent or to the board president, I'm intending to make this communication, and I'm not certain about something. And you have the opportunity at that point then to seek guidance from myself, or very often from the board president or from the superintendent, who may be able to tell you that the information that you're disclosing was information that was proposed to us, and it's still deliberative, it's still advisory, it's still consultative, and should not be disclosed to the public. Or what you're about to disclose, the board as a body hasn't made a decision that they want to disclose that. The best example that I can give you is that the board there may come a time where the board wants to make a disclosure about negotiations. But that's a decision that only the board can make, because it's advisory, consultative, and deliberative. That would not be a decision that a single board member could make. So again, I would agree with you that there's some redundancy here, but I think that when it comes to board communications, I think redundancy is a good thing.
Can I give an example? Just so tonight, Steve disclosed tonight or talked about the fact that the schools are being done at the AC at Johnson Park will be done next summer. So many of us, we've been talking about this for a while internally, and we know that this was kind of a long process to figure out what was the best way to go. But many of us knew about it. It's not a piece of information that is necessarily covered by a contract, or that somebody, is even deliberative, right? It's just information that's sensitive that we're kind of thinking about as a board. When is the right time to disclose it? Let's make sure that the Johnson Park staff and the parents hear about it first as a courtesy, and then we let Steve, we think about, okay, it makes sense, let's talk about it in our meeting tonight so it's on TV, everybody can hear it. That's confidential information. That's board confident. We're not hiding anything. We're just thinking as a board what the best way to communicate with the public is. But you can't take these other statutes that apply to, as I think Steve has said, different things and lay it on top. And so when we're working together as a board, we need to be able to say, I'm the one, I'm supposed to speak to the public for the board. Whoever the president is the one to speak, or Steve is speaking. Or, we think together about when we want to disclose different things, and that's just the way the board works. When we ask Matt for information, we want him to tell us right away. When we say, Matt, what's your ballpark on XYZ? And we want him to say, okay, I'll look at, here it is, boom, right here. That may be a number where he hasn't had time to maybe do a lot of research, but he's comfortable and he trusts us that we're not going to go and disclose it to someone tomorrow, because it's still kind of part of our internal discussion. I think we want to have that trust and that level of efficient kind of working together. So I think to kind of try to put these formal boxes on our information really limits what we're able to do as a board. That's my personal view. I don't know what other people think, but I think the Johnson Park thing is a good example of that.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have is, what is the penalty for if you sign this and yet board members will serve as ambassadors to the district, for the district, emphasizing the positive aspects of the district bill? I love that presentation that they gave about the scores. Yeah, I liked it too, but I was disappointed to see that the APs were underrepresented for people of African American and Hispanic. I'm not emphasizing the positive. Did I just violate this? That's the problem I have with this, with signing, is that it's too vague, it's open to interpretation. It's funny, that whole board community communications, if that part wasn't there, this would be so easy to sign. But that part is vague, and it's, suppose I get a call from Town Topics and they say, hey, so what do you think about some aspect of the referendum? And it's like, I think it's great. Am I allowed to do that?
You're not really supposed to be doing that. Now, I mean, let's
Why?
go through these on board community.
Yeah.
Because we spent a lot of time on this earlier this year, and I thought we kind of had agreement.
Yeah.
If there's particular things that people don't like, then we should talk
But
about
when
it.
we spent time on it, we had Jess, and it was more like, this is what we're doing today. That's how I felt it when we went through it with Jess. I didn't feel like we were allowed to think, oh, I don't want any of that part in. It was more like, this is something that other boards use, And we went through it in that sense.
Then we kind of agreed that it was what I thought what we wanted to do, but, so can we just talk specifics here? You know,
Yeah, because I agree with him, that top sentence, it's just, I
That,
don't
and I guess,
understand that.
what does it mean to be a spokesperson? Does that mean if you're elected to the board in Princeton, you're not allowed to talk to anybody from the media unless you're the president? I guess that's the question.
Well,
And if you do, does that mean you violated and you should be subject to ethics violations and kicked off the board?
well, I'm not sure that's a helpful.
Well, I mean, as a lawyer, that's what I always think. It's like, okay, you've committed an ethics violation.
We have
Now they
board
bring-
policies. The board
Yeah.
policy is that the president speaks for the board. There's 10 of us. We're 10.
Yeah.
None of us ever speak for the board individually.
But can you speak individually as yourself, as
Yes.
a member of the board, that you're excited about the referendum and you're excited about something?
The Code of Ethics says you don't lose your ability to speak as an individual, but you have to make sure what you say is accurate, it's
Mhm.
not confidential, and it doesn't undermine the work of the board. Right?
So if we had something like that in there,
That is what the Code of Ethics says.
It's just the Code of Ethics. I mean, we're not making this up.
so I agree, but suppose, so it sounds like I'm allowed to say to Town Topics that I'm excited about the ACs and the way they went in Riverside. That was a well-done project. I can say that without violating this. That's my question,
You're speaking for yourself.
as a board member.
No, if you're speaking, right, you happen to be a board member, but you're being asked as an individual what your opinion is?
They might be asking me as a board member elected to the town, elected by the town.
You clarify up front what capacity you're speaking in.
Mhm.
That's my understanding is that, sorry. My understanding is that you can certainly exercise your right to speak. You just have to clarify that you're not speaking for the board as a whole. You're always going to be an elected official or board member, so when you're speaking as an individual. You happen to be a member of the board.
When you think about it, the provisions, if I may, the provisions are not in collision with one another. You have a policy that says that the board president speaks for the board. And I want to emphasize that she speaks for the entire board. And that is why there is a requirement if you are going to be speaking as a board member, because you are always a board member. So if you are speaking of and about issues concerning the board, you have an obligation to self-identify. So it isn't enough for you simply not to make a representation that you're not speaking for the board. You have an obligation to say, I am a member of the Princeton Board of Education, and what I'm about to say, I'm saying as a taxpayer. I have not been authorized by the board to say this, and I am not speaking on their behalf. So I don't think that those two requirements are inconsistent or in collision with one another. I think they're entirely consistent. That you respect the fact that when the press makes an inquiry of the board, that the only one that can speak on behalf of the board is the board president. And if the press makes an inquiry of you as an individual board member, you have an obligation to essentially speak clearly, state the facts, but also make it very clear that you're speaking as an individual, not as a member of the board.
Steve, is there an exception when the board president officially delegates to another board member? For example, if there is a question about tonight's presentation, can Beth choose to delegate Betsy to be the member of the board who speaks to the press?
I think it's in our policy.
The
It's in
answer
our
is
policy.
yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. And there may be times when the board president simply is not available to do that or doesn't feel that she has the knowledge or the expertise to do that. Is this not on? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Or doesn't have the knowledge or the expertise to speak about a particular topic and delegates that responsibility to someone else.
I just had a question before we go through this part.
Sure.
You have mentioned the word policy a few times. So this is not a policy of ours. This is sort of an informal charter. I'm wondering, do you see that boards of education have communication policies that are this specific? Is that what you're, as a lawyer, is that sort of your advice that it become a policy? Or is this purely workings of the board and how we agree to work together.
So it can actually be handled either way, but in response to your question, do I see policies emerging by boards of education that are similar to this and that they are finding their way into policy? The answer is yes. And I think that is because of the issue of social media and the concern the concern that has, I think, legitimately grown out of the use of social media by board members. And so, yes, I see this. I see this kind of charter, if I can call it that, as distinguished from a bylaw or a policy. I see this being developed by boards as a matter of policy, a discretionary policy.
So let me just, and I'm reading from Oprah and the Open Public Meetings Act. And so I am concerned about the potential for abuse or selectively enforced would be another term I would use. And one of the things I see here, it says the legislature finds, this is quoting from chapter and verse, the legislature finds and declares it to be the public policy of this state that government records, blah, 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 will be available as amended and supplemented and shall be construed in favor of the public's right of access. Construed in favor. So, I'm just afraid someone says, well, I don't want that information out there. Let's, call it confidential for 4 months.
But again, what and perhaps I haven't stated as clearly as I could. The Open Public Records Act governs the right of access to public documents, government records. And if someone makes a request for access to a government record, we have an obligation to determine whether they have a right of access. And we determine whether or not they have a right of access based on the various exceptions that are established by the statute and that have also been established through the common law and through the Government Records Council. That is very different, in my opinion, than what we are talking about here. And I do not think that the Open Public Records Act is in any way implicated by this, because this is not an issue about what the public has a right to come in and ask for a copy of and to see, whether or not they have access to it. This is about the kind of communications that board members can make and the content of those communications. And as I understand it, what board members are being asked to do here is to acknowledge that their communications cannot contain information that is confidential, that is privileged, that is deliberative, advisory, consultative, or that has not been authorized by the board. Very different from the issues very different from the issues and the rights that are intended to be protected by the Open Public Records Act.
Yeah, Peter.
I wasn't intending to say anything in my first meeting, but I'm a lawyer, so I can't keep my mouth shut. Being on a school board, this is now my third school board in 7 and some odd years, is a very strange thing, because you're elected, so you answer to the people that voted for you, but at the same time you are put into a box. And you do not have the freedom to just say whatever you want to say, or do whatever you want to do, or give anyone a piece of paper, or disclose information. You have a box you have to live in. And it seems strange because it seems like it's conflicted. But I think as Steve has described it, it really isn't, because the board acts as a board, as a unit. Each individual one of us does not have a right that the entire board has. And so when you look at it from that framework, where the board can act, and we have a spokesperson, you can only have one person speaking for the board, because otherwise no one's speaking for the board. And so when you think of it in that construct, any document, if it's public, someone can ask for it, and it has to be decided by the board to turn that over because it complies with the law. An individual board member doesn't have that ability or right to do that. As far as communication goes, in kind of talking to number one, it does seem, wait a minute, that's limited. I can only say things that emphasize the positive aspects of the district. When you think about the fact that the board, once the board makes a decision about something, it's the board's decision. And even if I disagreed with it, even if I voted against it, and I've heard this in every year in an ethics
Every
training, even if I voted against it, I can't speak against what the board said because it was the board decision, and I don't have that right anymore as a board member. As Michelle said, as an individual human being on this planet who has the First Amendment right of free speech, as long as I disclose that I'm saying it as myself and not as the board, that's perfectly fine. And so I don't see these being limiting or really, well, it may sound vague, it's really not when you think of it in the context of our roles as board members, separate from our roles as people living in this community.
So, I mean, you know, to build on that, for example, if there's a piece of information private, what I would do last year that I wanted, but I was a citizen last year, not an elected board member, is I simply submitted an OPA request. And the information was generally provided to me, and that's public. Should I submit OPA requests, you know, and create some work if I want information that may not yet be public, but is public by OPA?
So again, you as a board member do not lose your right as a citizen of Princeton to make an OPA request. So you have the right to submit a request for government records the same as anyone else does. Generally speaking, board members do not undertake that exercise. They will generally request copies of public documents from the administration. And I think the administration will generally be very accommodating as long as it is not onerous. If it is an onerous task, and what I mean by that is if you ask the superintendent or the business administrator to generate documents and it is going to be a significant undertaking, then that shouldn't be done unless the entire board wants the administration to undertake that exercise, because it is taking them away from their responsibilities. So if that's something that the entire board feels that the board could benefit from, then that request should come to the full board. But again, you have the right to make an OPA request as a private individual. Being an elected board member does not deprive you of that opportunity. I don't encourage board members to make OPA requests. I think it's unnecessary. I think if board members are acting reasonably when they make the request for that information from the administration, then it should be granted to them. Because my assumption is that board members are going to be making those requests in good faith because it is going to inform them or help them with regard to the exercise of their elected responsibilities. So hopefully that gives you the guidance you need.
Just one clarifying question. So earlier, one of our board members made a request for the schedule of buses, which we maintain. That seems totally reasonable that it would be provided, perhaps provided to the full board. At that point, is that information deliberative or has it just become public?
So I think that the answer to your question is that if that is a document that is maintained in the ordinary course of business, and I got the impression hearing Mr. Bolden respond to that request that document exists. Now, if that document exists, it would be my opinion that if anyone requested a copy of that document, whether they heard about it here tonight or independently, we would give them a copy of that unredacted, because there would be nothing in that would be a security risk or confidential. But in further response to your question, the fact that it was requested by a board member, I was in the audience. I heard the request. It made good sense to me. And I would also encourage in that situation that when a document is produced for a board member, that every board member be given a copy of it, because it obviously is informative.
And so with that information, I'm informed. If I thought there were members of the public who would be interested in that, is that a decision I get to make, or is that a decision that the board as a body makes?
So if you were in possession of that document, would you then, if that document was given to you publicly and it's a public document, would there be any violation of the School Ethics Act or any violation of any of your policies if you disclose that to a third person? The answer would be no, because now it is in the public domain.
Can I ask another, good night. Can I ask another clarifying question? Many of our committees work in closed session and in public session, open session. If something is discussed, committee work is, it's ongoing, it's deliberative. If it's discussed in open session where there may or may not be members of the public present, sometimes we have a public session and no one comes. Is anything that is said at a public session of a committee now in the public domain, non-confidential?
So the answer to that question is yes. But what kind of an interesting twist to that is with regard to documents that may be shared by your committee. And if those documents are advisory, consultative, and deliberative, because you have because you haven't made a determination about it, even though you're having a discussion about those documents in public, they still maintain their privilege as advisory, consultative, and deliberative documents. So let's say, for example, that the board was here having a conversation about the budget, and you were developing the budget, and that's a very long and obviously exhaustive process. And you're talking about various budgetary expenditures, and documents are produced for board members. And let's say that you even refer to those documents here at a public board meeting, they still maintain their privilege as advisory, consultative, and deliberative. So there is a distinction. There's a distinction between what you say at a public meeting, at a public committee meeting, because that is now in the public domain, as opposed to the exchange of documents by your committee members. Those maintain the privilege.
And just to follow up on that, and I think I know the answer, but should we presume that documents shared and discussed in closed session are by definition not public?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Documents that are discussed in executive session are confidential documents, and it would be highly unusual, in my opinion, for those documents ever to be released to the public, with some exceptions. We understand under the Open Public Meetings Act that executive discussions and executive minutes, that we maintain the confidentiality of those documents for as long as we determine that to be necessary. But the implication in the law is that there comes a time when executive minutes are available to the public. Now, it's entirely possible, in my opinion, that there could be documents that are shared in executive session that become part of the minutes. If that were to happen, we would have to make a determination if the board later decided that the executive minutes should be available to the public. We would have to look at those documents to determine whether they should be disclosed to the public or they should be redacted in some form. But in my experience, it is highly unlikely that those documents would ever be disclosed to the public.
All right.
I'll just mention one last thing. This is quoting from the Open Public Meetings Act. And again, I want to be consistent with the spirit and the intent of our laws. And it says here, the New Jersey courts have recognized the potential for misuse of the closed session exceptions by public bodies, and have therefore strictly construed these exceptions in an effort to further the legislative intent of providing open public meetings in most instances. So anyway, I want to comply with the spirit and the letter of the law.
And I certainly agree with that. I will say that we have to be ever vigilant, because when we go into closed executive session, I think that very often we allow our conversations to transgress those boundaries. So we do need to be very vigilant about it. But again, I do not believe that the Open Public Meetings Act is in any way implicated by what you're proposing to do here.
Thank you.
Just before, can we take out that first line, or you're going to leave it in, emphasizing the positive aspects of the district? I just feel it's big brotherish.
I don't know how people feel about that. It's the line is the board members will serve as ambassadors for the district, emphasizing the positive aspects of the district.
Could we add when they speak as a board member? I mean, right, that's what we're doing when we speak as.
This is only governing us as board members. Right.
And not as, okay.
I mean, to me, it's, our ethics item, what is this? G of our ethics says, I will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools which, if disclosed, would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I will provide accurate information and in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for at school. Like, that's a box I'm comfortable
But that's
being in.
accurate, versus positive aspect. Like, it just, I don't know. It's not working for me, but.
So if you had to be inaccurate because you needed to be positive, do they conflict with each other?
That would conflict.
I think the accuracy is pretty important. So we've got to go into closed session and talk about negotiations. So the question is, what do we do again with our communications document that we've talked about many times?
Isn't it, there's a motion on the floor?
There's a motion on the floor.
And
yeah.
second on the floor, can call a question.
Well, let's call the question. So the motion on the floor is whether, I don't have it, whether the Board of Education accepts the communication agreement attached. Is that all we say? We accept it, and we request a copy be included in the permanent minutes. So can I call the question? All in favor? Okay. Motion passed?
Yes, motion passes.
Thank you. Okay. Then that brings us to closing discussions and comments.
Yeah, I was curious, do we have the demographers report? I thought there was an October 15th date.
I don't know, Matt, if you want to speak to that. So we provided the demographer with our October 15th data, as well as some additional data that he was requesting. And he will be finalizing that and sharing it with the enrollment committee and with, and then after the enrollment committee reviews it, we'll
Right. It's still
share
in
it more broadly.
process.
Still in process, yes.
Yeah, we haven't seen it.
So when is the enrollment committee meeting again? I mean, when you say it's in process, like, are we getting it in before Thanksgiving?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't really know. I assume it's coming soon?
I would think so too. We had emails exchanged with George over the weekend, so, George Sundell, our demographer. So I would say in the next few weeks, yes.
And does the enrollment team have a meeting before Thanksgiving?
I don't know. They haven't scheduled. Yeah.
No, not yet.
And then when would it go to the full board? I'm not on the enrollment committee.
I know, but as soon as it's.
I don't even,
it's gonna
who
be
on the
done.
board is on the enrollment committee?
No one's on the enrollment. That's a public citizens committee. We have liaisons. Dan's a liaison, but it's made up of citizens.
Okay. So, I'm
And
sorry.
if there's a report when they come out, and if he's come out with a final report, there's no reason why it's not going to go to the board. It goes
Oh,
to the board
okay.
as well.
That's what I'm asking.
There's
Yeah.
nobody.
And the purpose of the Citizens Committee is just to get, again, deliberative process, have them pose questions, make sure that we've got the right assumptions, so that when we finally do go public, we have the benefit of the insights of some experts in the community who
So
understand
like 2
enrollment.
weeks? I'm just curious, 2 weeks or 4 weeks? He had no idea. Oh, because, no, you said you spoke to him on this weekend.
No, we just emailed,
Oh.
just to make sure that he had the data.
He usually turns it very quickly.
Yeah,
so
I don't want to speak for him. I would think a couple weeks. Yeah.
Max.
As a point of clarification, the enrollment numbers aren't finalized until the first week of December, so it'd be like a final draft, so to speak, because we go back and forth with
So you
other
upload-
districts on.
That's important to notice, like, we upload the data on October 15th, but then there's still a period of adjustment that goes on for a month and a half.
We could be claiming one student that another district is also claiming at that time. So
Right, but
there's
we're
a-
talking, that's really
It's
the
very
small.
small.
That's
No,
small,
so
like, that's not what I'm
Yeah.
worried about. I'm
No,
worried
but it
about the
wouldn't-
future.
Understood, understood.
Clearly,
Yeah.
clearly.
Can I get a motion to?
I actually have one more quick topic.
Yeah.
I had emailed about this earlier. So we used to have in 2018, where it says public comment on agenda items. We used to have a 15-minute period right after that, which was open public comment for the entire public on any item. And the idea behind that was so that people in the community, often we allow students to go early so that they can get back to do work. But there's many other members of our community who may not, our staff members, parents with small children, they want to get to bed, who can't stay until 10:30 or 11 to get to that part. So I noticed it was missing. I actually really missed that, and I just wanted to bring that to the board in public to discuss. Now, the downside is bringing back another 15-minute period at the beginning of a meeting. We could keep it to 15 minutes. That's what it used to say. It was under J where it said public forum. Number 1 was public comment on agenda items. Number 2 was open topic, 15 minutes. I just bring that to my colleagues to say I think that was a really good practice of the board and was much more inclusive. And I'd love to see that brought back.
Can I ask a legal question since we have our lawyer here? Can we just make our first comment open. Why do we have to have agenda items only? Can't we just have them both be open?
You may, it's entirely at your discretion.
That would
Many
solve
board-
it.
Many boards bifurcate it the way you do, agenda items and then public discussion on anything. But there are also many boards that just have a public session that
Right.
does not restrict
Rather
the
than
discussion.
having two 15-minute, separate 15-minute ones and then another 15-minute. We could just have a 15-minute open and then a 15-minute twice.
They could speak to agenda items at any
How do
time.
people feel about that? Do you have, Michelle? Michelle?
I'm a fan of letting people say what it is they want to say and not restricting them to agenda items. The problem is that sometimes people don't really know what it is they want to say until after they've heard the discussion. So if you take away the ability to speak at the end of the meeting.
No, you'd keep it.
I think
Oh,
we
you
should
would keep
both.
that, okay.
Just open
And
them
then
both.
and then they could talk about anything at the beginning or
Either.
anything at the end?
Right. Yeah.
I'd be in favor of that, yeah.
Okay.
I suspect that it may require a change in your policy, so I would just check that. My assumption is that
Okay.
your
We
policy
can look at that.
would have to be amended. You would do that on one reading.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you, Betsy.
Thank you.
A motion to, oh, yes?
Before we have a motion, I just wanted to thank everybody for welcoming me. I'm happy to be here in Princeton, and it's my first time meeting most of you. I just wanted everyone to know this is kind of a reunion for me because Steve and I worked together back in Upper Freehold. He was assistant superintendent of curriculum when I was on the school board there. So I'm happy to be back working with Steve and happy to meet all of you and work with all of you together. I look forward to it
Happy
this
to
year.
have you back.
Thank you, Peter. Okay. Motion to adjourn to closed session. Greg?
I'm going to make a motion going.
I just made a motion.
Into closed session.
To go into closed session.
Closed session.
Closed session. Oh, go into closed session, we're not.
Correct.
adjourning. Okay, we're
Closed
going
session
in
for purposes of
for purposes of
Yes.
discussing negotiations.